Hey everybody, it's my first day. Welcome to Guns, Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns, a Fantasmagorium presentation. When a James Bond movie... What is going on?
We're still live.
No, I know, but I'm getting such feedback. Anyway, when a James Bond movie is released... No. No, I know, but I'm hearing things. Hang on. Sorry, guys. Oh no, Kat. Things have gone south. Let me just read my thing and pretend like I can't hear it, and then I'll see if I can address it. Guns, Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns. When a James Bond movie is released, there comes a time to digest, a time to rewatch. There is, however, no time to die. Welcome to our part 2 of our review and recap of what can arguably be called the part 5 of the Vesper Saga. I am Scotty, experiencing technical difficulties. My opposite number is Catherine here, and Steve has returned to Pea's Gloria for dinner and dancing. Hey, Kat.
Hi, Scotty.
So, I am getting everything back at me seconds after. That's how my sound is going.
Well, we're going to have a great show tonight. We are going to recap No Time to Die, scene by scene. I've been looking forward to this one. There's a lot of things I forgot to talk about in our review on Saturday, which is more of an open spoiler discussion. This, of course, needless to say, will have heavy spoilers as we go through the film, and should be a great time. Scotty, any luck over there?
Oh, I think I just had luck. Everything seems fine. You know what it was? This is such a newbie mistake, which is really weird considering the nature of the film that we're about to discuss. I had a different James Bond review video going on in the background. Welcome to part 2. I was playing part 1. All
right. So, without further ado, I will mention at the very least the movie is currently sitting at $326 million worldwide, which is pretty good. Underperformed a bit at the American box office, but that's kind of expected. Bond audiences skew older in the United States, and that demographic doesn't rush out on opening weekend, so I expect it to have legs. I saw the film for the second time yesterday, and there was only old couples there, which I kind of expected. That not many kids are out seeing this film, so I think it'll that audience will come and keep feeding it more numbers. So I think it'll have some legs here. But now we can actually review the film in proper. Now, anything to say before I take off on this one, Scotty?
Absolutely, because you've had an opportunity to rewatch.
Yes.
How was the theater experience the second time around? Were there as many people? Was it less enthusiastic? Or were you with not the hardcore fans, but just the people who were like, okay, we'd get around to it?
Yeah, it was the latter for the type of fans. Far fewer people. There were only 3 other couples in the theater, but this wasn't IMAX. But actually, I noticed a lot more on the screen precisely because it wasn't IMAX. You can actually, not so much of it is on your periphery. I would say that on the second viewing, that the first half of the film is definitely stronger than the second half. I think Safin is a much more effective villain in the first 2 hours of the film than he is in the third act. I do think that some of the stuff we'll get into with Spectre is a bit the way they're trying to handle it, but I still had a lot of fun with it.
Okay.
I think it's a very good Bond film.
Excellent. I am still digesting it, and as I mentioned in our previous conversation, I'm sort of referring to this. Oh, by the way, I didn't do this last time. Kat, would you like to take care of the spoiler warning?
Yes, big time spoiler warning right now on the screen. Heavy spoilers from here on out.
I don't know how to do that. But yes, last time I said there would be no spoilers and I immediately spoiled it. For that, I apologize. I'm a jerk. So this time, this is your warning. I can't believe people are still watching after the technical difficulties happens.
Yeah, maybe they're not. I don't know. So
I don't know.
The film begins with a gun barrel logo, but a different one. When he fires at the camera, it caught me off guard because the blood doesn't drip down. I'm like, wait, what's going on? And then I noticed there weren't really any shadows on the actual gun barrel, and it's kind of turning pure silver, and it's fading into this like a crossfade into an aerial shot over the snow in Norway, which I thought was actually a really cool type of shot. A neat effect to do it this time, maybe not all the time in the future, but okay. So we see this guy in a parka, and he's kind of limping along, and he's got like an AK-47 on his side, and he's kind of heavily breathing, and he's making his way towards this cabin out in the clearing in the forest. We see inside that it's actually Madeline and her mother, and her mom calls her downstairs. She's kind of drunk, half passed out on the couch, asks for her medicine, which is cardboard box wine. Madeline brings her the wine, and she sort of callously tells Madeline that her father's a killer. And, oh, why do you don't love killers, do you? And she's like, oh, Mama, stop it. It's not true. The mom spills the wine because she's, again, drunk. Madeline goes to get cleaning supplies from under the sink, and that's where we see the Beretta 9mm that she spoke of in the previous film. She then starts heading back.
Okay, hang on a second. Because this is the part where I was actually just like, go to the sink. I know where the gun is. And it was nice. Like, it was a nice reference back to exactly what happened at on the train ride in Spectre. I thought it was great. It was a wonderful reference, and also it was done tastefully. And also, Madeline's mom was a crazy drunk.
Yeah, and I thought that was an odd choice for that. And
the regret of a mother having been supported by murder.
Funny thing, my friend saw the movie. He didn't know what the scene was about when it first opened, and until he saw the gun under the sink. And he's like, "Oh, that's so cool." So she goes back over to her mom, and she starts cleaning up the wine on the floor, and starts heading back. She hears this noise, and she turns, and you have like an actual jump scare moment where you see this guy standing there in the parka with a gun, looking in the window, wearing this Japanese no mask, very expressionless, such as the one I have over there, which you can kind of see next to the fan. That's official prop replicas. So he's wearing this creepy ass mask. She turns and runs and tries to get into the room. They have like a safe room there, but she doesn't know the combination. So she runs to hide like under the stairs. Safin comes in the door, and we do see a brief shot inside this safe room where we see Mr. White's Spectre ring sitting on the page of books, and we see on the security cameras as Safin's walking inside the house. And we hear this interesting moment where he walks up to Madeline's mom, and he very calmly says, "I'm looking for Mr. White. Is he home?" And she's looking at him like, huh? Almost like she thinks he's dreaming or something. And then
Dave's not here, man.
Yeah, he's like, "Well, my name is Lucifer Safin, and your husband Bernard, my family. I need to see." And he's so dry and dispassionate about it. Like, this is just another thing that he's doing on the way to work or something. Like, he's not that in it, which is really creepy. So she doesn't tell him what he wants to hear, so he shoots her to death with the AK-47, or which I assume is an AK-47. Madeline flees upstairs and hides behind her bed in the loft. Safin comes upstairs, and he's kind of limping along, and he looks around the room, and there's like a little kid's show on TV, and he thinks there's nobody there. He turns to leave, and this little toy phone or whatever starts going off. He spins around and fires like this, and then she leaps up from behind the bed in a total badass moment. She just starts plugging him with bullets, and I immediately had a flashback to the end of John Carpenter's Halloween when Dr. Loomis is shooting the Shape, and he's shooting him several times. Because Safin even does the same thing, where he's kind of moving back in this weird way, like how like the Shape did in Halloween, and he falls off the loft in kind of the same way. Madeline walks over, and she looks down, and you see him just lying there again, like the Shape at the end of Halloween, and it's so creepy. And you see that mask is just kind of broken. She goes downstairs,
which you happen to have behind you.
Yeah. Yes, another official prop replica is pretty cool. So she goes downstairs and starts dragging him outside. His head kind of starts thudding on the steps as he's being dragged. And I don't know if she would have been able to drag this guy, but okay, because he looks pretty young. But she gets him out in the snow, and all of a sudden he just gasps for air, and we realize that he was wearing likely a bulletproof vest underneath it. Some people
he was in the trailers. I knew he wasn't going to die.
Right, but some people theorized from the trailer that he had dextrocardia, like Dr. No, which is where the heart's on the other side of the chest, which is why they thought that he was still alive with the bullet hole in the chest, which I'll get to some theories on that later. So anyway, she gets up and starts running and falls into the thin ice on the lake. He goes over there, and at first he's raising the gun in a menacing way, but then he kind of pauses as he sees her looking at her, and he gets this creepy kind of idea, and he starts shooting into the ice, and he reaches down, pounding on it, and he pulls her out, and you have this excellent match cut going from her as a little girl being pulled out of the water to her as an adult. And it's she and Bond in Italy on the coastline. Bond can tell she's feeling kind of weird about it. He's like, "What's wrong?" And she's like, "Nothing." And it's not exactly clear how much time has passed since the last movie. I'm guessing maybe a few months. So they're in the car, the DB5. They're driving along the coast, and she's like, "Oh, drive faster!" And he's like, "Why bother? We have all the time in the world." Which is, of course, one of the references to Majesties. Hans Zimmer uses the music for Majesties as well here. They drive into town, and she notices that he's constantly looking over his shoulder and comments on it, showing that he's still a bit paranoid. They go through town, and they're seeing that everybody's burning these pieces of paper, and they ask this guy, "What's this all about?" And it's like, "Oh, it's kind of a festival. It's a tradition where you write down your secrets and you burn them as a way to kind of purge yourself of the hauntings of these memories or whatever." So they go into their room, they make out, and we find out that the reason Madeline wanted him to come here is because Vesper is buried in the necropolis, and she seems to think that he still needs to get over her, which I thought was a bit odd because Bond's whole emotional arc in Quantum of Solace was getting over the Vesper relationship and getting that out of his system. So I can see that I was wrong, Scotty. You were right. I thought from the movie Spectre, when he picked up the interrogation tape, that him tossing it aside was just his way of showing that he's over it. You said no, and apparently that's true because he's actually bothered by it here. So the next day, he goes with this kid that's kind of like a teenager or whatever, is showing him the way to Vesper's tomb. He looks at it and he burns a piece of paper that says "Forgive me," and then he notices this index card and the flowers, and it has the Spectre logo on it. And then another kind of jump scare moment. Yeah.
How long was that card there?
The Spectre card?
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing that the kid is the one who put it there, and he probably put it there before Bond showed up that morning. Like, he probably had people in town watching him, kind of thing, I think. So the bomb goes off. Big jump scare moment. They do this great thing with the soundtrack where you hear like the ringing in his ears. You can't hear anything. He gets up and he immediately calls Madeline on the phone, and she's not answering. So he kind of is trying to shake it off, and he sees that the teenager, the guide who took him there, and the kid's kind of looking back kind of wryly, and he realizes, aha, he set me up. So he chases him onto the bridge, where we see that moment that we've seen a million times in the trailer, where the kid kind of stops and kind of laughs at him. We see the car coming behind him. Bond dodges it in the nick of time. But then a motorcyclist comes up who's going to be our main henchman in the film. And so Bond is forced to jump off the bridge, grabbing onto these cables, swings down onto a lower parapet. The villain kind of looks at him, is spying where he's going. Bond takes off running. Primo catches up with him on his motorcycle. They get in a fight, and Bond tries to garrote him to death. And he's like, "Oh, Madeline's the daughter of Spectre. Blofeld sends his regards." And Bond doesn't want to hear it. So instead of finishing garroting him, he just smashes his head into like this stone, which causes his left eye to pop out. We see like this robotic bionic eye, which is immediately reminded me of the GoldenEye Rogue Agent video game type thing. It's even on the left side of his eye. And I thought, okay, cool. So Bond takes the guy's motorcycle, and then we see the next moment, iconic moment from the trailer, where the funeral procession, or the big procession, is in the way. So he does the big jump up the ramp. He goes up another side stair, runs inside to the main lobby, and the concierge says, "Oh, Mr. Bond, your wife's package has arrived, or is ready," which is interesting, because I guess they got married. Or at least they're telling people that they're married as part of a cover. I'm not sure.
Package has arrived, or his luggage is outside?
Oh, maybe that's what he said. Maybe he said luggage outside. I couldn't catch that part. But I did hear the part about the wife, so that's interesting. So he runs back inside her room, and they don't use the line from the trailer where he says the past isn't dead. Instead, he says, "You're right, letting go is hard." And he actually gets really angry with her and grabs her by the shoulders and shaking her. His voice is like really rising, and he's mad. Like, how'd Spectre know I was here? And she insists she's innocent. Their phone rings, but they don't answer it. He drags her outside. The DB5 is there. They get in, and she's like, "There's something I got to tell you." And he's like, "Yeah, I bet there is." And they take off. You have a bunch of villains show up driving Jaguars, because of course they do in these movies. She's like, "Oh, the phone starts ringing again," and it has. I thought that was funny how even the phone for the identifying who's calling it has the Spectre logo.
Yeah.
And he answers it, and you hear Blofeld's voice, and I heard the first part of what he says. He's like, "Oh, Madeline, your father would be so proud of you." And she hangs up the phone. She's like, "Why would I betray you?" He's like, "Oh, we all have our secrets. We just didn't get to yours yet." So he keeps taking off, and she says, "James, I would rather die than," and then they get T-boned.
All right, let's hang on here. Hang on a second. You seem to be very reactionary to James Bond feeling like he was set up when one person sent him to a location where a bomb went off and a person tried to kill him. People.
I didn't say he was wrong to think that she set him up.
I think it is completely justified for James Bond to do the following.
Yeah, I didn't have a problem. I'm not saying I have a problem with it. I agree. I get it. Because like they even set that up when she says, "Why are you looking over your shoulder?" Because he's still really paranoid. And then even in that chase, we have that bit where the car actually gets, scraped from going up the little ramp. And an awkward moment where this guy with a bunch of sheep gets a phone call saying, "Release the sheep or I'll kill you." And that's how they got trapped in the town square. And then you have that great moment.
And I think that's the moment where I was like, what's going on? Release
Right.
the sheep?
That took me out of it for a second. It's kind of odd. So we then get to that moment in the trailer that we've seen a million times where the car is trapped. There's a bunch of Spectre guys all around them just pounding into this car. Primo shows up again without his eye. He's got this like big shotgun or whatever, and he walks up to the window. He's just pounding it. And Bond is like, he doesn't even care because he thinks he's been betrayed. I'm not going to bother with this. Who cares? But then he looks at her and notices that she's like genuinely afraid, and he buys it, and he figures, okay, maybe she didn't set me up. And so he finally says, okay. And he turns on.
Well, and as I mentioned before, Madeline was primary target in that vehicle.
Right, because Primo did walk around to the side of the vehicle and was trying to pound her in particular. So we then
Phrasing.
Yes, we had that great moment from the trailer where the headlights open up, and instead of the machine gun pistols from Skyfall, it's been upgraded with Gatling guns, and Bond does donuts in the town square, which is just awesome, blowing everybody away. He then takes off and does a few real slick moves, a bunch of J-turns with the car. Reminded me a bit of the chase in Goldfinger through the warehouse, where they did those neat camera moves with the car. Yep. And eventually he pulls the car to a stop at a train station, drags her across the train tracks. They embrace, and she's like, "Is this it?" He's like, "This is it." He puts her on the train, and she's like, "Well, where am I going to find you?" He's like, "You won't. You'll never see me again." And he's like, actually kind of mad. And the doors close, and you see her kind of cover her stomach for like a quick second, like blink and you miss it. And she's starting to cry. And as the train is moving out of the station, she's running along the train trying to keep him in sight until eventually he just turns his back on her. He's gone. Mm-hmm. And in a blatant reference to Dr. No, we have all of the colorful polka dots suddenly come on the screen.
I can't wait to see this movie again, because you keep talking about these polka dots. Your favorite part of the movie is the polka dots.
It is. See,
it's cool.
It is cool. So
it is cool.
Yes, it is. The main titles themselves are pretty awesome. It's a combination of clocks, the Hercules statue. Of course, in Roman, it means Heracles. We see like all these vines kind of growing over it, and blood kind of coursing out of the pores is really interesting. There's a few references to some of the other Kleinman or the other early Maurice Binder title sequence bits. One of my favorite parts is where you actually see all of the No masks with the vines growing underneath it to form like a bunch of creepy paper people type of thing. The song I thought was pretty good. It still holds up and matches for the context of the scene. The movie,
and I still say that No Time to Die is sung from the perspective of Madeline's one.
Okay, that's interesting. I thought it was from Bond's perspective, but anyway.
I always took I've listened to it a couple times, and when I pivot it a little bit, I don't find it to be a great Bond song, but considering that Bond may not be the primary survivor of this film, I do enjoy it being a retrospective from Madeline's perspective.
It is. And so we come out of this sequence with a title card that says 5 years later. We're in London. And there's a bunch of SWAT guys coming down the side of a building, and they do this really neat thing with a camera where initially the shot's upside down because they're rappelling down upside down kind of, and they're putting these two like high-tech glass cutters on either side which shoot almost what look like lasers to cut the glass silently. They start moving in, cool. And then we cut to this bioweapons hazard lab where we see this scientist, Valdro Obershev, who I really don't like this character because he's played for comic relief and just too cartoonish at times in the movie. His two coworkers play a joke on him where they put like where did our weaponized smallpox go? And they play a joke by putting it over his lunch container. And he's like, you people, my tomato soup or my tomato sauce in this soup is more complex than any thought in both of your brains. And then you kind of laugh at me. He's like, yeah, just wait till next time I get you and you'll start bleeding out of your pores. And at first it's really funny, but then when you realize what he's actually about later in the movie, it's actually pretty scary because he's serious.
Well, he's the kind of guy who only does it if he can get away with it. That's why he needs Safin.
Yeah, that's true. So speaking of which, he gets a phone call, and it's Safin on the phone telling him to download the files on the flash drive. Blofeld's men are coming to kidnap you. Cooperate with them because they think they need you. And he's and then Safin just hangs up. And they never really say in the movie how far back that relationship goes or how that relationship was first initiated. But
the doctor guy's part of Spectre.
Is he? Because Spectre's kidnapping him.
Well, no, but it's also one of those things where, you know, it's like a Don Corleone. Give him an offer he can't refuse. You want to join Spectre? I'm sure he did something or he got away with something, but then Spectre found him valuable. Like, don't forget, the revenge and extortion, two other things.
Right, but Safin is, he knows him from somewhere, and we don't really know where. Okay. Safin is a clear enemy of Spectre. I'm not sure exactly where, because it seems like as we get later in the movie, his loyalties are clearly with Safin all along. But I guess we'll get to, that was a little. I don't know.
I'm implying some manipulation of Spectre through Safin's ruses.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. So the power.
Do you mind if I smoke?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks.
So the power goes off in the room. The SWAT guys storm in with their laser pointers. They round up all the scientists. And it's Primo again, the guy with the bionic eye. He's got his eye back. He asks for Valdo Oberleshev. He identifies himself. He's like, I need you to give me the weapon from exactly the weapon that Safin told him they were going to ask him to get from level 4 biocontainment. And he's like, well, what weapon? He's like, Heracles. And it's like, okay, something called Heracles. And Valdo's like, well, it needs 2 people to authenticate. Like, who's the other guy? And it's his other buddy, played by Hugh Dennison, who's, as I understand it, a British comedian, which is interesting casting. So they go into the side room, and the other scientists start pleading for their lives. One of them says, oh, please, I have kids. And they just massacre them outright. It's pretty brutal. So they go into the next room. They open both of them open the containment chamber. They get out the Heracles virus. They help Primo load it onto this like special briefcase that's, you know, coded to help carry this stuff safely. Primo then ruthlessly just shoots the other scientists dead. And then they start putting...
One of them pleads for their lives. Says, exactly. No, please don't let him.
Yeah, and so, one of them did say that. Like, don't let him have it, but they take it anyway.
No. Don't let him have it. She didn't say don't let him have it. They were walking out of the room. She looks at scientist guy and says, sorry, what's his name?
Valgo,
and says, don't let him about the imminent murder. And Valko's like a Roadrunner cloud. He's out.
Oh, I didn't pick up. It sounded more to me on my second viewing like she was saying like that she said that when they were first taking him away and said, don't let him have it. Like, don't let him have it. No,
I just thought that she felt it was not her time to die.
True. Yeah. So they take Valdo and they put all of these cords and almost like bungee cord, things all over him and all of these little dots, like red micro dots. Like, what is this? And then they pick up that big Acme looking bomb from the trailer. They drop it down. I'm guessing it's like the elevator shaft, but they just had the elevator at a higher level. So it's falling down and it's spinning around all of these little red, what are essentially magnets all over the walls. The bomb then hits the ground, embeds in the concrete, and detonates. They then have Valdo and the other guys all jump and go free fall down this tube or down the chasm. And once the lights turn green on these little magnet receptors, it magnetizes and they slow down, which is something I've heard about before in other movies. I thought, okay, that's kind of neat. Meanwhile,
I really liked it. I was still angry at the movie at this point, and I was like, it's just reverse Star Trek The Final Frontier. They're just going down instead of up. Sure, you can stop, whatever.
Yeah. So then Primo sets all these explosives and blows up the lab to cover their tracks. And we don't see how they make their final escape because it immediately cuts from here to back to MI6, which has got a new building this time, not the old one from Spectre. It's now this other, I'm sure it has a name in real life. I'm not sure which one it is. So this is building right off the river. Moneypenny marches right into M's office, and he's kind of reading the newspaper, and she's trying to tell him what happened, and he doesn't want to hear it. It's like, no, nothing. It's like, well, what about, should we tell the PM? He's like, no, don't tell him anything. And she's like, well, what do I do? And he's like, where's 007? And then we cut to Jamaica, where we see Bond on his fishing boat. He's just gone fishing, and he walks up to his neat bungalow, which I love this set because they actually built this for real on site at a protected cove, which protected in the sense that nobody can ever build like a hotel or a private house here or anything. It's like always going to look natural, which is pretty cool. And he sees a pile of cigar ash on the front door. He carefully snoops around the house with his gun. He doesn't see anybody there. So he goes to take a shower. He's got this neat outdoor shower type thing, and he's brushing his teeth with like the wood toothbrush.
It's a lagoon. That was a Dr. No reference in my mind, but it was like he was brushing his teeth in a waterfall in his private dock. It was great. It was exotic. It was James Bond. James Bond retired to a Jamaican getaway. And when he wakes up in the morning, he brushes his teeth in a waterfall. That's James Bond.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a reference to Fleming's own estate, Goldeneye.
Quite.
really cool. So Bond gets dressed and he takes his car into town. And as he's driving down the way, he passes this woman who's parked on the side of the road on a moped. I immediately recognized her as Nomi from the trailers. It's not. He kind of takes note of her, but I don't think he suspected anything at that time. He then passes another car, which is kind of dented, and the car starts following him. And then Bond gets into town and pulls this slick move in the roundabout to get them cornered. And he's like, "Oh, hello, Felix." And then it's Felix and this other guy. And he's like, Bond's like, "Who's the blonde?" And he's like, "Oh, hi, I'm Logan." And then they do a smash cut, and then it's them walking in the street, and he's like, "Ash." And he's like, "Oh, I'm from the State Department, newly appointed." And Felix is like, "Hey, man, I need a favor from you." He's like, "I'm kind of retired, Felix." He's like, "Well, I wouldn't be asking you this favor if you still worked for Her Majesty's service." Which tells you there's something going on.
But it was a great line from Felix.
It was absolutely, it's a great line. So he says,
not only a great deliver. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I'm gushing. Like, it was a great line from Jeffrey Wright, the way he delivered it, the way that it was the first time that it solidified the friendship outside of work between Felix and Bond. And it was like, I wouldn't be here if you were working for the man.
Yeah. So
now James Bond is a CIA asset.
Yeah. Well, not yet. So he asked what was anywhere we could talk privately. And he's like, "Oh, okay." So they takes him into this nightclub. And they're sitting at a table and they're playing some game. I'm not really sure what this game is or how it works. It's like they're having
dice or I don't know.
I'm not really sure. I would like to learn though. So he fills him in and asks him about, Valdor Obrashev, and Bond's like, "Should I?" And he's like, "Well, he defected during your tenure in MI6." And this is kind of an interesting scene because Felix is clearly fishing to find out how much Bond knows about Obrashev and Project Heracles and that kind of thing. And I thought this is a bit inconsistent with Felix's morals from Quantum of Solace, where he's understandably angry the whole time because he doesn't like the idea that the CIA is going to let this coup d'etat happen. And now we have that same Felix trying to turn Bond against MI6 to steal a virus that they want for themselves, which is okay. I felt that was a little weird that Felix is, because even when Felix says that line straight from Fleming, hard to tell from good to bad, that villains from heroes these days. Well, he's saying that so to make Bond not really feel bad about the idea of working against MI6. Because again, he's fishing for information. So I thought that was a little, kind of odd that he's doing that. And Bond asks about, Logan Ash mentions that you should be interested, Bond, because it involves Spectre. And Bond's kind of curious, like, who's the Book of Mormon? And he tells, State Department, nothing to worry about. So
that's the only thing that put me off. That's the only thing that put me off, is that obviously this guy, new guy, Logan, is like, how did he get to hang out with Felix? That's the only part. Like, saddled with him? Is he kind of like David Harbour in Quantum?
Well, yeah, because Felix mentions that Logan Ash is a political appointee. And and by the way, Logan is also very much fanboying over Bond and how he likes him so much. He's like, "Hey, Felix, you haven't told him the best part about Spectre, haha." Like, he's totally gung ho, and Bond didn't really want to hear it, which is why he and Felix moved to a separate place on the bar. And after Felix makes his case, Bond is like not very interested, and he's like, "Maybe." He's like, "Oh," Felix is like, "You don't have my number." He's like, "I got your number, Felix." So Bond walks out of the nightclub, and as he's leaving, we see Primo in the club, who's apparently snooped in on this whole conversation. Bond goes outside to find that his car won't start, and then Nomi pulls up again.
Can Primo hear through his eye?
I think so, because yeah, for sure. So
I love this henchman. I do.
I love it. So Bond comes outside, his car won't start. Nomi pulls up and she puts on this fake Jamaican accent, asking if he needs a ride. Bond's like, "Yeah, okay." So they take off and he asks who she is, and she's like, "Oh, I like coming here to dive old wrecks." He's like, "Oh, you've come to the right place." So they go back to his house that he first wants to give her a drink, but since she asks, "Oh, is that the bedroom?" And he's like, "Oh, okay." So they march right in there, and in a Live and Let Die reference, you see that she's wearing the white dress and she takes off the wig and she throws it on the bed, and then she turns around and Bond's like, "Oh, that wasn't the first thing I thought you'd take off." It's just pretty funny. And then she's sitting down and she puts on her regular voice, her British accent. And
okay, hang on 2 seconds. This is where I was like, okay, hang on a second. We've gone through everything that has happened up until the end of Spectre. We've basically covered it all. We got Madeline Swan, we got Mr. White, there's Spectre references. Obviously, everything else has happened. Then we get to the part where Felix and Bond, and for, the longest running Felix lighter, with
Yeah.
one of the and at least the longest pairing of a Felix and a James.
Yeah.
Then we get to this part, and I don't usually like to talk about the cacophony of the internet, but I had been hearing so much about the new 007.
Yeah.
And we get here, and the first thing he said, not the first thing I thought you were going to take off. And it reminded me so much of Pierce Brosnan and M in GoldenEye, in terms of, yeah, we get the references. It was almost like it's still James Bond. We're still doing all of the things. We're still cool. And I was like, okay, take me on the rest of the movie. Let's go.
Yeah, for sure. So she introduces herself, and he's like, "Are you a 00?" And she's like, 2 years, so stay in your lane." Or because she basically is there to sternly warn him to stay out of it because he's retired and you better not play for the CIA. And she's like, "Oh, stay in your lane, or I will put a bullet in your knee, the one that works." And he's like, "Oh, Jesus Christ!" And so he says, "Oh, why don't you just tell M that I'm not interested? Whatever, I don't really care." And she's like, "Tell him yourself." And she tosses him her cell phone, and she's like, "See you in Cuba." Because that's what I forgot to mention. Because Felix told Bond that the lead is that Oberchev has been sighted in Cuba, and that's where he wants to go to meet an agent. So anyway, she leaves, assuming that even though she warned him not to, she just assumes he's going to be there because she's smart. So Bond's like thinking about it, and the next morning he calls Felix he calls Bond on her phone, and Emma's in the office, and he answers it, and Bond's like, "Oh, I met you." He clearly M clearly didn't realize that it was Bond calling because it was 007's personal phone. It was just something else. So she's been given the new 007 code number and all that. And he tried to be flippant, saying it's just a number, but yeah, that'll come back later. So he calls M, and M's kind of surprised to hear that it's Bond, and he's really stern with him, upset, and he kind of thinly implies that the reason he's in this mess is because he feels Bond abandoned him. And it's like because Bond is aware of the Heracles project. And he says that was from 10 years ago when he defected. I'd like you to shut that down. And he says, well, this is, you abandoned it, blah, blah, blah. And I was wondering if that was kind of the implication here that, hey, Bond, you turned your back on us when we kind of needed you most, right when we, cracked the ego bone on this whole Spectre thing. And so now he's felt the need to really, push this Heracles thing. And Bond says, well, you know what? It is my business because it involves Spectre. And he's like, M doesn't really believe him. And then Bond just kind of hangs up on him because M is being really stern and dismissive. And so Bond stands there on the dock. He's thinking about what he's going to do. And he's like, yeah, okay. So he gets out his other phone, calls Felix, and says, okay, Felix, I'm in. And you hear Felix on the other line with Logan. He's like, yeah, he's in. like they're having like a geek out moment.
It was fun. Yeah.
And meanwhile goes down to Q Branch and he's like, bring me Blofeld. I want to see.
Also, just as a throwaway entertaining moment where they're geeking out and it's like, yeah, he's coming, he's in. It's like, okay, everyone in this movie is they're in intelligence, all right? Like, they all are monitoring each other. They're all figuring everything out. So when you wonder why people know about different things, it's like Felix knows everything that has happened to James Bond since the end of Spectre because it's Felix Leiter, not necessarily because they're texting each other. He's in the CIA, yo. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Right. So M goes down to Q Branch and he wants to know what's the status is on the drives that got, Oberchev's drives just got blown to smithereens by Primo's bombs. And Q's like, well, it's really hard to get anything off it. If I knew something more about the project, it's like, and Q cuts him off. He's like, M cuts him off rather. Says, no, that's enough, Q. Just tell me when you get something. And he asks Tanner, what have we got on Blofeld? I want to see Blofeld right now. So they pull him up on a security camera and we see Blofeld is in a padded cell and he's acting like a lunatic. And Tanner's like, mad as a bag of bees. He's been that way. And M is like, good. Which is kind of interesting because I would have thought being 5 years later that Blofeld would have tried to maybe roll over on some less important underlings to get himself a comfortable prison life. But no, he's just living in this padded cell, which leads into some of the issues I have with, because it's Blofeld. But, I'll get to that later. So,
yes.
So M's like, okay, just keep on top of it. And you could tell clearly that M is in charge of this, whatever this bioweapon is, and is keeping it off the books. And he doesn't want the prime minister to know, which is another thing. Is Tanner says, oh, the PM is on the other line. He's like, tell him I'm busy. Just tell him something. He doesn't want to talk about it. And, Tanner and Q and Moneypenny are kind of looking at each other, and they can tell there's something going on, but they're smart enough not to push it too hard. So then we cut to Santiago, Cuba. Bond is in his fishing boat, and we see a Nomi land in the harbor in a float plane. Bond and Nomi look at each other from opposite sides of the harbor. She kind of waves at him like she expected them to be here. Bond goes into town outside this nightclub called the Nido, which translates to the Nest, which is an interesting name there. So he goes.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so he walks up to this bar and he greets Paloma, and she's like, "Oh, you're late," and she immediately starts walking away, wanting him to follow her. And he starts mentioning the code word, something about a hat in Paris. She's like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "Oh, yes, that's right, the code word." She's like, "Sorry, I'm nervous. I've only had 3 weeks training, and this is going to be my best job ever." And she grabs him by the hand and pulls him into the back, and he looks over like this, like he's being taken for a ride, which is pretty fun. So they go downstairs, and he's like, "Do you live down here?" She's like, "No, it's the wine cellar." And no sooner did they get in there, she starts like tearing off his shirt, and he's like, "Oh, shouldn't we get to know each other first?" And then she's like, "Oh, no." And she pulls out this bag that's got like a tuxedo, which is a clear callback to when Vesper did the same thing, when she had Bond's tux already, trimmed and cut for him kind of thing. And so Bond takes the tux and he's going to put it on, and she's kind of still standing there staring at him. He's like, "Do you mind?" Like turning around. She's like, "Oh, okay." So they get dressed to the nines. They walk across the street into this club, and we see a bunch of callbacks or not callbacks, but a bunch of cameos rather from the Spectre boardroom agents from the previous film are at this big party. We see Michael G. Wilson's cameo. As I mentioned, he's in the military uniform with all these awards. So Bond and her are walking around. They're looking for Oberchev. Eventually, they're trying to find him. Meanwhile, Oberchev is in the back, in like this back room with Primo. And Primo opens the briefcase that's got the Heracles in it. He's like, "Oh, give me the information." And Valdo's like, "Oh, okay." And he's like, "Oh," and Valdo's on his laptop saying, "Don't worry, I'm just loading it up, just checking." And Valdo does this neat, pulls a shell game where he pretends to swipe the thing on the ground. He's like, "Oh, let me pick it up." And he covers it with his foot, and he swaps the flash drive with another one, boots it up. And he's like, "Okay, ready to go, ready to take this mission for the glory of Spectre." And so he gives the drive to Primo. He merges it with the Heracles, and it kind of changes color when you boot it in, which is kind of interesting and sci-fi, admittedly. So then Primo takes it, and he hooks it up to what I assume is the ventilation system in the building, and seals it up, and then they go inside the party. Bond and Paloma, meanwhile, are still walking around, and they see these three guys walking around, holding this colorful velvet pillow with a bionic eye on it, and you see various Spectre agents toasting to the eye, and eventually you start hearing Blofeld's voice, because Bond and Paloma are wearing earpieces, and they're picking up on the frequency, and we realize that the event is Blofeld's birthday being celebrated. And that eventually Bond finds himself surrounded by all the Spectre agents, and the spotlight is just on him. And Paloma's like, "Wow, you're quite the popular guest here." And then Blofeld says, "Just for my favorite birthday present, the death of James Bond, my brother." I'm like, "Okay, we got to bring that up again."
Oh, come on.
Okay, yeah. So in all of the mist suddenly starts getting deployed because Primo's standing there with a smile on his face and hit the trigger. So we see the mist being deployed, and Blofeld says, "Don't worry, it'll be harmless to the rest of you, only to Bond." And he hasn't even finished saying this yet, as all the Spectre agents start falling over. And what is admittedly a pretty scary scene, where you're seeing that basically their faces start turning like really bright red, and they start getting all these white boils everywhere, and almost like a quick Ebola type attack, sweating blood, so to speak, kind of thing. And
second Star Trek reference in the movie. I was just like, "Oh yeah, no, this is like the Romulan Senate at the beginning of Star Trek Nemesis."
Oh, it's been a long time since I've seen that one. I have to see it again.
Good for you. Avoid. Anyway, so yeah, they're all dying.
Yeah, they're all dying, and we see this quick shot up on the ceiling where the Spectre logo is actually painted on the ceiling, and it looks a bit faded, suggesting that this is a club they've used probably quite often. It makes sense that they're hiding in Cuba, because it has been, 5 years in Blofeld's jail, all that kind of thing. So they're all keeling over dead.
Second interjection, they're still dying. Yep. So anyway, Blofeld has the power to set up this meeting for everyone to come and toast his birthday. And he's been in jail for 5 years. Lazy Blofeld.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'll get to when we get more to the Blofeld scenes.
Okay.
So they're all dying, and they spot Oberchev up in the upper rafters. He ends up coming down on the lower floors, and he's trying to do the thing where he's going to swallow the flash drive. And he ends up getting kicked. He drops it and starts scooting across the floor, and Bond swipes it. Then the big fight goes on, and it seems like the security guards have not had their DNA program, so they're not dying from this. Bond and Paloma end up going outside to this outdoor bar. I forgot to mention they did go up the bar when they first came into the party, and she just downed the whole thing in one shot, which was really funny. So
there was gulping sounds.
Yeah, they go up outside to the bar again. He gives a drink. He's like, "Salute," and then he cocks the gun, and then the music kicks in. Nomi drops down through the ceiling and kidnaps Oberchev. And we have this awesome fight out in the town square. where Bond and Nomi are taking out the Spectre agents, and Bond ends up deliberately crashing a car into these little like a scaffolding to bring the scaffolding down where Oberdechev was hiding to bring him down. Nomi's like, no, and he grabs him and they take off, and Paloma takes him to a side exit and says, oh, this is where I leave you, and you just go down here and you'll be down to the dock. And he's like, oh, okay. And she's like, oh, yeah, sorry, I'm leaving so soon. Seems like a meta reference that she herself is leaving the film so soon. So that Bond and Oberdechev take off down the hall. Nomi, realizing she's kind of cornered, does this trick move where she steps out in front of all the police who've since showed up, and she's pretending to surrender, but then she like drops a grenade, so she's able to make her escape. And that whole Cuba sequence was just really fun. It's like really, like I could watch that on the loop. It was fantastic. So Bond and Oberdechev steal Nomi's plane, which he told Nomi she was going to do. He's like, yeah, can I steal your plane? Okay. So they take off. Oberdechev doesn't want to get on the plane. Bond forces him on anyway. They take off and fly out to this ship that's off the coast someplace. They land the plane. He brings Oberdechev on. Logan and Felix are there. Felix is like, ah, my man. Like, oh, see, he makes it look too easy. So they take Oberdechev inside. They sit him down, and Bond is like really pissed off. He's like, thanks, Felix. You led me right into a trap. And Felix is like, what? So now Bond's getting angry, and he's like, how did Blofeld know I was here? Like, what was this about? He's like, well, you were supposed to be the target, but no, I saved your life. I swapped it so that only the Spectre people were dying. And he's like, why? He's like, well, because he told me to. Who's he? Who told you to switch this? How did Blofeld know I was even here? And the whole time he's interrogating, Logan Ash is getting really angry, telling Oberdechev to shut up and not say anything. And Felix loses his patience with Logan and tells him to shut up. And finally, Oberdechev just kind of looks to Logan for help. And then you realize, oh, shit. And Logan pulls his gun and shoots Felix in the gut. And that's when I knew, oh, he's done. And then they got in a really brutal fight. The gun ends up knocked out of their hands, and Oberdechev kicks it to Logan. And Logan's whole performance here is just really kind of creepy. He feels like a cult member, like a Manson family psychopath type thing. So it's a pretty brutal fight. Felix and Bond end up getting kicked into the lower decks of the ship, and Logan locks them inside. He sets a bunch of bombs, takes off in the plane with Oberdechev. He says, don't worry, I work for Safin. It's like, where are we going? He's like, don't worry, you'll be safe. So the bombs go off. The ship's starting to sink and fill with water. And what is one of my favorite back and forths between Bond and Felix, where he's trying to talk and say, oh, you're going to be all right, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, and Felix makes a mention how he wants to go back to fishing on the beach with his family or whatever. And Bond's like, you told me you're from Milwaukee. He's like, really? Did I say that? Maybe that wasn't true. I don't remember. It's just kind of funny. And I almost thought they were going to pull like an Aquaman reference where, Black Manta's father says, you got to let me go so you can go kick that guy's ass. Because Felix is kind of doing the same thing where he's dying and he keeps urging the Bond should press on without him. And Felix dies. And, he kind of drowns, and they have a shot, which is very reminiscent of Vesper, floating away in the water. And I admit the scene didn't have the impact on me that the movie wanted it to, because to me, they didn't. I mean, they used Felix more than ever before in this era. But, in Casino Royale, you see him, he's constantly losing at cards. And the one time he seems cool is when he catches Bond on the stairwell, and then he just awkwardly disappears from the movie when he's like, oh, much appreciated, brother. Like he's going to arrest Felix. Whereas in the second movie, he's just angry the whole time, which makes sense for his character.
Well,
and in this one, he's doing the weird, like I said, it's sort of inconsistent with his morals that he's trying to kind of turn Bond against MI6 because he knows damn well that this virus is like an MI6 thing, and he wants to get Bond to, steal it for the CIA. And given that the CIA was willing to turn a blind eye to the coup d'etat in Bolivia and help facilitate it, then obviously it's not a good idea for this virus to be in the hands of the CIA. So I just feel
agreed. But I do have a couple all right. So and also first things first, you are omitting when Bond says to Monica Bellucci, take this card, when you get to the States, call a man named Felix, he'll take care of you. So there is still, even when Felix is not in a film, there is still the legend of Felix Leiter. Also, I do feel I don't go in to go see Felix Leiter, CIA. I'm looking for James Bond 007. And so when Felix dies or gets his leg bitten off by a shark, it's all very sad, I understand. But I still hadn't fully understood what was going to be coming my way. Felix is dead. Guess what? We'll get another Felix. We've had tons. You want to see?
Great. But I just meant that I didn't feel he ever got like his Jack Lord David Hedison moment. Like the way that the Bond's banter with those guys, I felt was like super cool. In this case, I just felt that the movie wants you to really feel like a gut punch, but because he hasn't been used that much, because I mean, I know that in the future, we'll be able to marathon all 5 of these movies, whatever. But the reality reality is that Casino and Quantum were 15 and 13 years ago. So, yes, he was mentioned briefly in Spectre, but the fact that he's been gone for so long and to be used so briefly in this movie, and they're really wanting you to feel it, and I just wasn't feeling it. But I think it was done much better than the way they disposed of this in the.
I will write it down. Let's keep going.
All right, so we'll keep going. So Bond gets out of the sinking ship. He gets into a life raft, and then this big cargo ship shows up the next day. The horns start blowing, so he realizes he's going to be saved. And it fades to black, and it rates black for a while. Then suddenly these doors start opening, and you see the inside of this storage locker where we see the porcelain bulldog with that Bond got from the former M when she died. Skyfall. Yeah, Olivia Mansfield. And then we see the Bond standing.
Olivia Munn?
You said you wanted me to go on, so here we go.
I know. I'm sorry. I'll stop interrupting.
Yes. So Bond pulls the tarp off an Aston Martin V8 Vantage Volante, last seen in the living daylights. Awesome looking car. He jumps in. The Bond theme kicks in. He speeds out of this garage, drives into town, parks the car outside the new MI6 building. Comes out looking dapper as all hell, buttoned his shirt, and he walks right in. He gets up to the check-in desk and he says, and the guy's like, "Name? Bond." And the guy looks up at him. He's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "James Bond." And he gives him the tag. He goes in, and then Nomi spots him almost immediately, and Moni Penny's greeting him as well. And the first Nomi wants to get to business immediately. She's like, "Obrshev, you have him? Where is he?" And he's like, "Oh, he left with a friend." And these other people are walking, greeting Nomi as 007, but then they get kind of confused because they see both Nomi and Bond. They're like, 007, and walking around. And Nomi's like, "Oh, that must bother you, doesn't it?" And he's like, eh. So then they go into Moneypenny's office, and she's like, "He's waiting for you." And they're both about to go in, and Moneypenny's like, alone. She just wants to see him. And he's like, he turns to Nomi. He's like, "Does that bother you?" And go inside. She sits
Still
down.
James Bond. It's great. Seeing two 007s banter, especially I like this edition of the character. I like this edition of the play between the 007s.
Fantastic. So she sits down and she's kind of being a little flippant. And she's like, "Oh, I get why you tried some Moneypenny. I get why you shot him." And she's like, "Yeah, well, everybody tries at least once." So Bond is inside M's office. He's sitting down behind the desk. And the first thing he says is, "Did the desk get bigger or did you get smaller?" And Bond is really giving him the business about how this Project Heracles thing, you should have shut this down. Why are you doing this? And M just gets really pissed off. He's like, "You have no right to speak to me that way because you're not employed here. You abandoned us and left. What do you care?" And it's like a really tense scene, the most adversarial scene between Bond and M, arguably in any of the Bond movies ever.
Agreed.
And Bond eventually mentions that that Felix is dead, and that actually kind of brings him down a bit. And M's like, "Oh, sorry, I had a lot of respect for Leiter." But then Bond brings up pushing the whole virus thing again, and that kind of sours the conversation again. And Bond mentions that Blofeld was the one chairing the meeting in Cuba, and he's M is being flippant that can't happen, that's impossible. You're talking about. And he eventually basically tells him to get the fuck out in so many words. So Bond gets up, he's walking out the door, and he says, "Actually, no, it is the same desk." I was like, "Oh, burn." So he leaves. Nomi walks in.
Now, I did not like this dynamic between M and Bond in the movie. I do feel that M became too much of an adversary. I would almost say that Hercules is M's Silva, and they are both Heracles. Pardon me. I'm a filthy Canuck. So anyway, yeah, and I think that one, I don't know. I want to say betrayal or organizational failure when it came to Emma.
Yeah, well, I feel that
is forgiven, and this one is a trespass.
Well, I feel that the reason it's adversarial is because thematically, the movie's making the point that at 4 different points in this film, you have MI6, the CIA, Blofeld, and Safin all want this MacGuffin for themselves, and you have Bond kind of on the outside as our moral compass who says nobody should have this. And that's why I thought that was kind of the point they were kind of making.
Well, and also, so far, everyone in the movie has betrayed Bond. As far as Bond is concerned.
Yes, so Bond walks out of the office. Nomi walks in, and Blofeld, M says, Bond tells me Blofeld is chairing a meeting in Cuba. I want you to go down to Belmarsh, scan Blofeld's cell, scan his magazine, scan his bed, scan the whole damn man. And she's like, I'll even get my gloves, sir. Which is kind of funny. And on the one hand, I get a little bit of a teacher's pet vibe with Nomi. I mean, she obviously has a lot of respect for him, but at times it almost seems like the way she interacts with Bond is so natural and playful. Whereas with M, it's very much obviously a very business oriented relationship and almost like almost robotic in a way, which I kind of felt.
Nomi doesn't. Nomi works for M. Bond doesn't. And also, and that's why I think it's much more. Maybe I saw more of the relationship that I enjoy between Bond and M in 007 and M, where it was more of a, yes, I will do that. I am on Her Majesty's Secret Service, so I will do anything you have to say. And so when it came to Mallory and Bond, I was a little bit more, oh, I wish you guys were friends. But they weren't. And obviously, because of the weapon of mass destruction, I guess. And you're absolutely right. Bond was the moral arbiter in that particular situation. Also, I wanted to say, I don't know if I said this, is that everyone had already betrayed Bond, not that Bond had betrayed everyone. That's, I just clarifying.
Right. Yeah, so Bond is walking back through Moneypenny's office. He takes off his badge, just flippantly throws it in the voice bin, just like Connery used to throw his hat onto the hat rack. And Moneypenny kind of sees, gets worried. She follows him out to the door, and she's like, hey, Bond, are you free for dinner? And he kind of looks at her sideways, like, this is kind of odd. But he's like, okay. So then we cut to Q's house, and Q is, like, preparing dinner. And in an apparent Austin Powers reference, we find out that his cats that he mentioned in the previous movie are basically Mr. Bigglesworth. It's just funny. And he checks the camera from the doorbell, and he sees that it's Bond and Moneypenny's like, oh, God. So then he opens the door, he buzzes him in, and he looks at Bond. He's like, oh, so you're not dead. And he's like, oh, hello, Q, I've missed you. And they walk in, and he's like, I can't, not now, I'm busy. He's coming in half an hour, so apparently he has a dinner date.
Wait. Can this just be a reference? Because, okay, it is in the Desmond Llewellyn era of James Bond, there has been a disdainful relationship between Q and Bond. And also, let's not forget at the end of the last movie, James Bond stole a car from Q Branch. These guys, Q's pissed. Major Boothroyd had a burr in his bonnet based on the lack of that car.
Well, no, officially it would be that he stole it. However, if you recall, at the end of the last movie, he walks into Q Branch, and Q's like, oh, Bond, I thought you'd gone. And he's like, yes, but I realize there's one thing I need. And Q looks at him and understands, like,
okay.
So, which admittedly should never have happened because it's a company car, but, whatever. So Q's upset with Bond, and he's picking up his cats to put them outside on the patio. And Bond's like, Q, those things come with fur these days. It's kind of funny. And they're like, well, we need you to examine this hard drive or this flash drive. And he's not really interested, but they're not going to leave, so he concedes. And essentially, he walks over to one computer. He was about to plug it in, and he kind of stops and moves over to another one as if it's like almost like a callback to Skyfall, where he flippantly, plugged in Silva's computer without even thinking about it. So he plugs it in this other computer. They're examining it, and it's like it's got all the DNA files for the Spectre agents, and all of them are deceased except for Blofeld. And but then you see that a bunch of other names are on there, and all of these pages and windows just keep opening with thousands upon thousands of names. And they're like, well, ours are probably on there too. And Moneypenny says, yeah, Ancestry DNA databases have been hacked around the globe within the last several weeks or whatever. And so Q's like, good God, this is like insane. And then they ask him about the Heracles virus, and Q's like, well, it's coded to specific DNA types. And so Q's going to keep looking at this information for them. Ask him nicely. And Bond's like, well, I need you to get me into Blofeld. I need to see him. He's going to know what's going on. And they're like, well, only one person's allowed to see him. And he's like, who? And they don't want to tell him. They're like, who? And then we cut to Madeline. And she's on her way to her office. And we find out that she's actually a psychotherapist. Her new office is not nearly as cool as the one she had in the last movie up in the mountains. But, oh, well. Yeah. She's heading up the stairwell. And one of her colleagues says, oh, yeah, your new patient is already in there. He's weird. And she's like, we can't say that about our patients. And it cuts to her office, and we see Safin sitting there playing with a strand of her hair. And then he quietly folds it up in this cloth on his lap. And this is, I'm going to tell you, my favorite scene in the whole movie. And he's sitting there, and she's greeting him, and he's talking, and he mentions, oh, you're so attractive. That must be really difficult with the other clients. And you can tell she's taken off guard, like nobody's ever said this before. And then he comments about the flowers that she has over the side. And he says, oh, yeah, foxgloves. And he said, yes, one little bite of that if you eat it, and then your heart will stop. And he does that. And I'm like, that reminded me for a split second of Pennywise when he does the way he says that, which is interesting because Cary Fukunaga wrote the script for the It movie, which ended up being made by Andy Muschietti.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Was that the end of your thought?
For that particular thought, yes.
Okay, so in terms of the plants, my split-second thought was, oh, mistletoe. You know, it can be deadly if you eat it, but a kiss can be deadlier if you mean it. Because I thought that Safin and Madeline were going to be former lovers. And so that's what I took into it from the trailer. And so when we got to that, I was like, oh man, I know they're not. But at that point, it just, that was such, I really enjoyed that interaction between Safin and Madeline.
Yeah, and I love his whole demeanor here. It's so creepy, and he's like the creepiest Bond villain there's ever been, for sure. And he's talking about how he lost his parents at a young age, and she's like, oh, that could be very traumatizing. And he says, yes, I have a difficult time, talking about myself. So I have this little memory box. And he pushes it over to her, and she opens it, and it's this mask here, the broken kabuki mask. And she looks at it, and she just starts, tears start rolling down her face, and she looks up, and she's super nervous.
Well, to be fair, she did not know that this was the guy.
Right, she didn't recognize him, which is understandable because we can see that...
Because of the mask!
Well, not just the mask. We can see that the scarring on his face isn't nearly as bad or pronounced as it was in the pre-title sequence. Mm-hmm. Like, in that sequence, it was... because she mentions later in the movie that he had dioxin poisoning, which that's what it actually does to you, by the way. So his face is all like, has all these chemical burns on it. And she looks at this, she's absolutely terrified, and he's like, yes, so your father killed my family, and so I killed her. He's like, oh, parents, like a little flippant thing. And I love how this scene is an inverted version of the one in Spectre, where Bond is the patient going to Madeline and disturbing her about news of the death of her father. And now this is Safin going there as her patient, disturbing her about memories of the death of her mother.
Oh.
And so it's like really, really kind of eerie. And she's like, well, what do you want? She's like, I need you to do something for me, a favor. It's like, why would I ever do something for you? He's like, because when you save a life, you now own that person as much as you would when taking it. It's like they belong to you. I'm like, oh my God, this guy's so creepy.
But it's such a good line.
It's a great line. And it's like he's talking about her like as if she's part of his butterfly collection or something. And she's like, well, what do you want? What are you going to do? And he's like, he gives her this, another reference to Majesties. He gives her this little spray bottle, which looks like the perfume spray bottle that Blofeld gave all the angels of death in that movie.
Oh,
he's
right.
like, oh, you're going to put this on, you kill some for me. And she's like, why? I don't. He's like, if you don't, I will kill the person you love most. And she's like, well, I don't love anyone. I've lost everyone I ever loved. He's like, we both know that's not true. And it's just so creepy the way he does so good at this. And she's like really petrified. And obviously she can't like call the cops or anything. What she's going to say, it's like, oh yeah, this looks like a guy I may have seen 20. Yeah, there's nothing really she could do about it. Interestingly enough, they never do go into flashback explaining how that sequence at the lake ended. It's like, I assume he just dragged her back to the house and left her there. And even though he felt ownership over her, I guess he never went back to visit her, which is why I was on board with you, thinking that they were going to be revealed to be past lovers or something, because it is odd that he saves her because he feels he has ownership over her, but then he doesn't come back to her or even think about it for nearly 20 years. It's admittedly a little weird, but that's fine. Most Bond movies, have things like that.
But it sort of spoke to the characterization and, like, to credit Rami Malek. Like, that was, I think I understood in the beginning of the movie when he gets shot with the bulletproof vest. And as far as he's concerned, the last thing he saw was being shot in the chest. And then he woke up. And then he went like the shape after the thing that tried to kill him. And in the moment of revenge, well, you tried to kill me, it was almost like a thoughtful nature of Safin being like, but I'm not dead. Well, maybe you shouldn't die either. Saving her, and then once she emerged from the water, then she was alive, and thusly bringing us out of that reverie from the opening sequence. I thought it was all like balanced very well character-wise, and again, like just incredibly performed by both actors.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good one. That is a really great place to put it. So she takes this thing and is realistically going to do what she wants. We then cut to Bond and Mallory, who are for some reason now meeting out on the street by the side of the river. And Bond's like, really? Madeline Swan? And he's like, well, we checked your information from 5 years ago, and she checked out, which means that after he bumped her on the train in the pre-title sequence, he must have called MI6 and told them, which is an interesting tidbit. And it's like, okay, so she became Blofeld's psychiatrist because he was the only one that Mallory says that he wanted to talk to or would talk to. And
what is my brother like?
so
how do you enjoy James?
So Mallory explains that, like, I'm sorry, and, I created this thing because, we were trying to reduce collateral damage on the battlefield. Like, keep agents and soldiers out, or drones, which are known to cause collateral damage. He's like, it was never meant to. So, look, come on, it's like, I'm sorry, you can come back in now. He says, like, Bond's like, okay. So we cut to MI6, back to M's office at MI6, and in walks Q, and Moneypenny tells Q, oh, he's, Bond's in there with him. He's like, really? And so Q walks in the office pretending to be all surprised, like, oh, Bond again. And M's just like, shut up, Q. I know what you're doing. I know he's staying with you, which I love that line. That was so funny. And it's like, I'm trying to picture that Bond just kind of, shacking up with Q, and just Q's home life and everything. This is fantastic. So M just wants to, okay, just tell us the information. What's going on? So Q's like, yeah, I've examined the information as you wanted. And he says, well, Project Heracles, it's originally designed to code this specific individual's DNA. But Q's like, Oberchev has since altered it, so now it is actually lethal to their entire bloodline. And he shows footage from a funeral of one of the Spectre agents where the family members are kissing his forehead in this open casket funeral, and then they all died of it as well. And they turn to M, and he's like, look, it wasn't ever meant as a weapon of mass destruction. It was, limit collateral damage, that type of thing. And M he kind of stops mid-sentence because he realizes there's no point in trying to defend it at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's basically admitting that he fucked up. And he's like, well, we got to do something, but we need to talk to Blofeld. He's like, okay. So Bond is walking with Tanner inside Belmarsh in one direction. You have Nomi walking with Madeline on another. And Nomi's telling Madeline not to, let Bond get to you or blah, blah, blah. And then Tanner's saying, oh, Bond, don't let, Madeline get to you. He's like, oh, I'll be fine. I'm not going to lose control. We have that moment from the trailer where he rounds the corner. And clearly Bond is affected by seeing her. And, of course, she already sprayed her wrist with the little, toxic Heracles spray. So she walks up to Bond, and he tries to be polite, and he extends his hand to, handshake, and she won't do it. And he's like, okay. So they walk them into the, the interrogation room while Nomi and Tanner go into the side room, and Nomi's like, does he have that effect on all women? And Tanner's like, 50-50, it varies. Just kind of funny. And then in a great bit, they really build up the fear factor of Blofeld being moved along in this kind of carousel type thing, moved up in his cell. His wrists are kind of cuffed to a pole coming out of the floor, so he can't move his arms around. And Madeline, Bond notices, is starting to shake. She's getting really afraid. And he's like, what's wrong? And he goes over to try and touch her. She brushes off, and she's like, James, you don't know what this is. And he's kind of odd. And then she starts freaking out. So he's like, get me out, get me out. And so Tanner's like, okay, let her out. So they open the door. She's about to turn to leave, but Bond grabs her wrist for a brief second. And she goes out. She's like, sorry, I can't do this. And he's like, well, where are you going? And she's like, home. And the doors close. And then Blofeld's up. And then you have this scene where, interestingly enough, Blofeld doesn't seem to be bothered by the idea that his whole Spectre got wiped out. And that's another thing I forgot to mention. Nomi did report that, he was communicating via this bionic eye, which is a replacement for the milky one that got cut up in the last movie, and that Bond had since told Nomi that says, you can trust her now, that, Logan Ash is the traitor, you need to find him, type of thing. So Blofeld, this whole scene is just very nonchalant. He doesn't care about what happened in Cuba. He tries to brush it off like it doesn't really get to him, and Bond's trying to kind of contain himself. And he's like, look, just tell me who they are, and you'd be happy, wouldn't you, if I can get them for you? This will work out, and then you'll never see me again, Blofeld. And he's not really talking about it, and instead Blofeld just hits him with a zinger, and he's like, when her secret finds its way out, it'll be the death of you. And he's like, Bond doesn't really want to hear it. And he's like, well, Bond, it was me. He's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, in Italy, it wasn't her, James. She had nothing to do with it. She guided you to Matera after the pure goodness in her heart, wanting you to get over Vesper for you. It was me. I'm the one who set the bombs. I'm the one who tricked you. And then Bond loses his shit. And he just, in a reference to Fleming's You Only Live Twice, he starts trying to strangle Blofeld. Not in immediate. He kind of leans in close at first and quietly starts grabbing him around the throat and choking him out. And he's like, tie, Blofeld, tie. And Tanner's like, holy shit. So Tanner just runs inside. Bond finally lets go of him, turns around. Tanner's like, you just violated. He's like, yeah, I know, blah, blah, blah. And he's getting mad at him. And then you hear this unceremonious thud. And you turn around, and with no fanfare or celebration or anything, Blofeld's dead as a doornail, and you see the virus kind of spreading on him. And I thought, this isn't really good, because it's like, now I assume that even though they never mention it in the movie, that after that if Blofeld's plan had gone the way he wanted, and Bond had died at the party, that he probably would have had his guys leverage the Heracles virus for getting himself out of jail. I'm assuming that. But the idea that it's taken the head of Spectre, this evil organization which could do everything, a full 5 years before he can initiate anything to get out of jail, that he hasn't leveraged any of his position to have a comfortable prison life, that he's just been pretending to be insane with his eyeball. It's just, I didn't really buy it. It was a bit, okay, I get it. I get what you're doing. You know that the fans didn't like the previous movie, so you want to downplay them in this movie.
Just brief bullet points.
Yeah.
Do you think there's going to be another Felix Leiter?
Yeah, since James Bond will return, I assume there will be another Felix.
So when Felix died, I believe that the death of Blofeld was sort of a, oh my God, they're killing everybody. They killed Felix, they killed Spectre, and now they've killed Blofeld. And also, I would like to remind you that at the end of Diamonds Are Forever, Blofeld just leaves.
Yeah, it kind of like Bond smashes the mini sub, but it doesn't blow up, and it's like, well, did he live? Did he die? It's sort of left unresolved.
So it has always been an unceremonious exit for Blofeld.
But I just thought that because of how they're playing it up, like it was a big deal, and I noticed that on the official Bond fan pages where it says
it was a big deal.
Well, I know
Waltz was back. It was a great scene.
That's what I mean, but it's like on the official Bond website where it says like, you know, when characters are introduced. Like it'll say Blofeld's first appearance was the novel Thunderball in 1961. It'll say Bond's first appearance was Casino Royale in 1953, so on and so forth. So it'll have like the first appearance and the last appearance for all these characters. Bond does not have a last or latest appearance because he's always going on. Whereas Blofeld very specifically has his first appearance for Thunderball 61 and his last appearance, No Time to Die, 2021. So I'm wondering if that's an indicator that they're kind of done with this character now, or at least for a very, very long time. Because it's like, I think that they might be kind of done with him. But I just thought it was so, just such a downer the way it happens. Like the agents at the Spectre party, when you first see them start dropping from the virus, is a lot more graphic and intense than the death of Blofeld, which I thought was more dramatic. Like even Christoph Waltz said back in an interview in I think 2017 or 2018 that he wasn't happy with his performance in Spectre because he's like, yeah, the material wasn't really there for me. So now, and even Cary Fukunaga teased it. Oh yeah, Blofeld's back. Yeah, he's in prison, but ooh, what nefarious plans could he have for the world? And I didn't feel that it was much of a payoff. I think I liked Blofeld a lot better in the last movie than he was here. It just
all right. The only thing that I can offer, I enjoyed it because it looked like it was a wave of destruction. It was just going to happen no matter what. Like once Felix and Spectre went and then Blofeld was there, I was like, well, they're not going to get him out of prison. That is going to reek of Skyfall. So I don't know are we just going to stick him back in the box? Like, is that what's happening here? And when he died, I was like, great, I don't have to worry about this anymore. They killed Blofeld too.
Yeah.
Which is really where I should have started to being like, hang on, wait a minute. But all right. So I had no problem with it. I'm fine with it. I don't think that this is definitive. Blofeld may come back, but I would also like to say who is responsible for pulling the strings on the death of Blofeld. That would be Safin. And while Safin does not have an incredible presence in the film in terms of screen time, Oma stars. He hovers over the whole thing more intensely than a Spectre.
Yeah, I just felt I don't have a problem with them killing him. I just thought it was really anticlimactic.
And I agree. And I think that
no, he's dead.
Based on previous Blofelds, it's always been anticlimactic. The guy is premature all the time.
Yeah, so then they do this cut from Blofeld being dead to Bond in Q Branch looking at his hands, and he just can't believe. He's like, how? It's like, how do I get this out of me? And Q's like, sorry, you can't. It's permanent. Nanobots for Christmas. Just kind of funny. I guess I should say that the nanobot, the Heracles virus, what it actually is nanobots, which have your DNA sequence programmed in and they latch onto your cells and they can kill you. Now, the base root of this technology is actually not as far-fetched as the movie would make it seem.
Interesting.
We've had the ability to program things for specific genetic haplogroups since the early 70s. You can't get it as specific as a specific individual's DNA. They haven't done that. But the idea, kind of like with Oberchev mentions later, that you could target ethnicities or target certain groups, you can do that. But there was even a scandal. Somebody was trying that in South Africa. It was pretty crazy. But back in like the early 80s. But this nanotechnology as well is something that was initially invented for medicinal purposes to do like surgery at the molecular level. But the reason they've been reluctant to really pursue it is precisely because of what Q mentions. When you get them in, you cannot get them out. So it's like, how do you design that to be safe? And so
I've seen this episode of Star Trek. I know what nanobots are.
Right. So I mean, that's pointing out that a lot of people I noticed in reviews were complaining about it, saying it's too science fiction and totally bullshit. And it's actually not as bullshit as it would seem.
Well, it's nice to know that it's an actual medical technology that has been resisted based on the concerns of a 2021 James Bond action adventure.
So anyway, Moneypenny asks, okay, so obviously we searched Madeline's home. She's gone because they've obviously since figured out that she's the one who brought the poison. And they're like, well, where is she? He's like, oh, I don't know if I can even trust her anymore. But Bond has an idea of where she is. So we cut to by the way, I forgot to mention as well, what's her name? Nomi got the update from Q that Logan Ash was spotted because Q was examining the Blofeld's bionic eye, and they had a meeting between Primo and Logan where he basically tells Primo, hey, here you're out of a job, but my guy, he's got a position for you if you're really interested, which is kind of interesting how I think that's the first time we've seen just maybe The Spy Who Loved Me, where a villain is like outright just recruited out of the blue like that. Like, hey, want to come?
No. I would like to remind you of Moonraker, where Hugo Drax picks up the phone after...
That's right. It was Moonraker. Spy Who Loved Me. That's right. Where he's like,
well, if we can get him, that would be lovely.
Yeah.
And then Jaws shows up. It was great. It was amazing. And that's part of the reason why I like this guy. I like Cyclops.
Yeah, so Nomi got the phone call that, okay, Logan Ash has been found. She's going to go get him. But they made a point of not telling us exactly where they spotted him, which is interesting. So we cut to Norway. Bond is driving the Vantage on the transatlantic road. He ends up parking it in the woods, and he walks along through the woods on the same path that Safin took with the same shot behind him, which is really creepy, but kind of interesting.
Well, one is snow and one is like clear and green. Like
clear and green at sunset, kind of. So Bond goes into the house. He has his gun with him. He doesn't know what he's going to expect. He goes inside and he sees Madeline there, and he basically apologizes. And she's like, well, I knew we're both not really built to trust people. And she asks, is he dead? He's like, yes, Blofeld's dead. And then he hears this little girl upstairs, and Bond's kind of interested in this. So he goes upstairs, and Madeline's putting her to bed. And she's like, remember, what do you do when there's trouble? She's like, oh, I run and hide. She's like, good. And Bond's like, he's looking at her, and she's like, she's not yours. It's like, but the blue, she's not yours. It's like, come, I have something to show you. And he's like, what, another kid? Which is very funny. So she takes him into the safe room that she couldn't get into at the beginning of the film. And we see that for some reason, that she's still got all this paperwork there on Safin. And she explains that his family were these wealthy chemists who owned this island where they bred poisons and other types of drugs probably. And they were Spectre's poisoners at one point. Blofeld eventually got sick of using them as middlemen and had Mr. White host this big dinner for them in which the dessert was laced with dioxin, with their own poisons that killed the whole family. And she says that, he survived but suffered horribly. Bond's like, okay. And I'm assuming, they never really explain all the way out, but I'm assuming that after the events of Spectre, when, Blofeld's arrested, the headquarters has been destroyed, Spectre's gone underground, that Safin was able to take back his island at that point. Because, the people are already working there at the facility. Spectre agents are kind of not running it at the moment. So he just kind of waltzed back in. And since his name would probably still be on the contract for the land since he is a Safin, it's like, okay, he just waltzed back in, and that's how he's got it. And he's still got, undoubtedly, money from his family's wealth, which is where he's been hiring all these, his total, SWAT team type, guys. So that's kind of what I assumed there. I
always thought of Spectre as a franchise, and so once you became you're gonna have to need your own personal army. You're gonna need remember back in the day when you were number 7 or number 12 or whatever, and so maybe Safin's family had their own nice little Holiday Inn, and they worked from there. It's a financial. It's not completely alien.
Yeah, I thought that one was explained sufficiently enough, or what I was able to put 2 and 2 together. So Bond spends the night with Madeline, and the next morning, the little girl Mathilde, that's her name, she walks up and she says she's hungry. So we cut to the kitchen, and Bond's making breakfast for them. And they're having this really peaceful scene, and then his phone rings, or not his phone rings. He had already called Q to tell him to do a name check on Lucifer Safin, and gave him pictures of took photos of the pictures that Madeline showed him, including where the island was. And so he gets a phone call this morning
Question before we move on. We're moving into the second half of the film.
We're almost into the final hour of the film at this point, so about an hour and a half in.
Right. And so this quiet moment, I can understand how this quiet moment is sort of the, okay. But I really feel like it defines what happens at the end. It is the quiet, it is the calm before the storm. And
Exactly.
it really sets up the crescendo of the film. And again, I just discovered this recently, so don't go back to the first episode when we're talking about Dr. No. I'm not going to say the word crescendo. But this is building up to the crescendo of this film. And I love a James Bond with a crescendo. Anyway, we're not there yet. Keep going.
So Bond calls MI6 because he gets a phone call in the morning. They're like, yeah, Nomi's closing in on Logan, and Bond checks his phone, and he sees that it's nearby. He's like, well, I thought you said Nomi was chasing Logan, not me. I'm like, well, he is. Well, where are you, Bond? And then he realizes, oh, shit. So then we cut to Bond getting Mathilda and Madeline in the car. This not in the Vantage, which he has since moved up to the house, but in this SUV or this like Range Rover or whatever. They take off down the road.
Civilian car. We don't have bulletproof glass, people.
And so Mathilda's like playing with her little stuffed bunny rabbit that she calls her doo-doo. And she's asking, oh, are mosquitoes friendly? Do the mosquitoes have friends? She's like, oh, I don't know. And trying to keep her calm type of thing. And we see these two SUVs pass them and then turn around later, further back on the bridge. Bond's like, okay, here we go. So we have this car chase kickoff. We have that one moment from the trailer where Bond rams one on the side where the other hits like the rock and kind of flips over and crashes. And then they drive out into this field where we see the great shot from the trailer. And I love that they did this for real, where you have the motorcycles and the Range Rovers just flying out of the trees, just pounding out. It's like, oh, shit. Bond races down along through this creek. This helicopter shows up, presumably Safin's in there. And Bond tries to turn out of the way of the chopper and goes deeper into the woods where there's a bit of a fog bank. He parks the car, moves him through the woods, and comes upon what looks like might be a hunter's blind, I'm guessing. And he puts Madeline and Mathilda in there and tells them to be quiet and he'll be right back. He runs away from there and starts shooting his gun in the air to try and lure the cars away. One of them comes speeding Bond's way, and he starts shooting at him like crazy, and it flips over on its side. He then gets an idea and reaches for the clingwire cable from the grappling hook out of it, starts pulling on it, ties it around a couple trees to make this tripwire. He then signals again, and the motorcyclist comes up, zooms forward, and just gets taken off by the cable. And then Bond just shoots him dead. And then we see Logan Ash drive up in his vehicle, and he's like, I got you, Bond. Starts shooting at him. Bond starts running and luring them over to where this huge fallen log is, or this fallen tree. The truck hit that moment from the trailer where Ash's Range Rover hits the tree, flips over. Bond starts firing at it. He then comes around the side where Logan has since been thrown from the vehicle. Looks like he probably has quite a few broken bones. The Range Rover is still stuck up against this small tree. Bond tries to shoot Logan, but he's out of bullets. And looks at him, and he's like, Logan's like, oh, you can't stop him. There's nothing you could do. You can't stop him. And Bond, in a wonderful reference to For Your Eyes Only here, Bond says, it's like he's looking at him very callously, and Logan's all, oh, come on, brother, you can let me. We're brothers type of thing. He's like, I had a brother. His name was Felix. And he just viciously pushes the car down, and the reference to how Bond killed Locke and For Your Eyes Only, just knocks the car down and crushes
it. No, that was bitchin'. That was absolutely awesome. Although I don't like that. It reminds me of Spider-Man. I had a father. His name was Ben Parker.
I didn't think
sorry?
That one not as profound as me. I wouldn't have remembered that. But I like
I'm just a big Spider-Man fan. So, that's what I thought when that happened. But so anyway, he avenges Felix, which is great.
Yes. So then, back at the hunter's blind, Safin shows up, and looking creepy as ever. And it's like, oh, geez. Bond makes it back to the blind and finds that Madeline. I don't know who that is. So he's like, oh shit. So he hears the helicopter. So he runs out of the fog bank into the back into the little valley and sees a helicopter flying away, and he's too late. It's not clear where the rest of the other SUVs went, because the ones that I believe there were like 3 or 4 of them, which if not 5, which came out of the trees, and several motorcyclists. So Bond only took out a couple of more SUVs and motorcycles. So I'm not sure where the rest of them went. Maybe Nomi was taking care of them off screen. I'm not sure. So Bond also, for some reason, instead of just getting his back in his own SUV, he's just walking along the side of the road. He gets picked up by Nomi, who's driving the Super Legra, and she uses her same fake Jamaican accent again. She's like, "Need a lift?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, haha." So he gets in the car with her and explains that, Safin has taken Madeline Mathilde, and Nomi kind of gives him this little look where she kind of realizes that, okay, she just assumes that this is probably his kid, and she's starting to gain a little bit more respect for him in a way. And he calls up Q and says, I need a C-17 ready at the airport. And so he's like, yeah, okay. So the Super Legra arrives at the airport. You have this bitchin' shot where they're just zooming across the runway. They pull up behind the C-17. They board the plane. Q greets them. The plane's airborne. And then on the laptop, M says, okay, the parameters of this mission are threefold. 1, you will find and kill Oberchev. You will kill Safin and, verifying the presence of Heracles. Oh, and you make sure to rescue Madeline and Mathilde. And Bond's like, okay. Nomi nods. And then in an interesting bit, Nomi formally requests that Bond be reinstated as 007. And he says, permission granted, which I did forget to mention that point earlier in the movie when M told Nomi that Bond had already been reinstated as a 00, and she kept going, 00 what? Which was really funny. But because she now assumes that Mathilde is his daughter, realizes the stakes are personal, she's gained more respect for him. Because he did say, it's just a number, but she kind of could think that maybe he is sentimental about it. She does request him get the number back, which is kind of nice.
Well, but also, like, again, you referenced when Bond walked into MI6 and he said the name is Bond, and then the guy looks at him and it's like, and James Bond. And so it is nice that 007 has reverence.
Yes.
To James Bond. Like, we know the legend that is James Bond. 007 knows the legend of James Bond, even if it isn't James Bond 007. So I did appreciate that. And then even the switching back, it's like, it's a neat character moment, and it also shows, like, people dig, like, nobody is people are angry at James Bond in this movie for sure. But the people who work with him are all like either begrudgingly helping him or understanding his reasons. He is the man that every man wants to be and every man that every woman wants to be with in this movie. Keep going.
So Q then is pulling out the drawers to get the smart blood again. But one of the drawers, for some reason, has a tea set in it, which is kind of funny. So then he gets out the smart blood. He gives it to, injects it into Bond and Nomi. And Nomi's like, how? And then he gives Bond his new watch, which has like combination EMP, can hack doors. Pretty cool. And then he's like, okay, we'll be ready shortly. And we see, you actually caught it earlier inside Q's house on the wall were blueprints for this little, jet thing that they're going to get in. And you see it there, sitting in the back of the plane. So then we cut to Safin's island, and Safin is walking. He's got his kimono on, which is not just sort of a Dr. No reference, but also a reference to Shatterhand, because that's what Blofeld's dressing at the time.
Yes.
Madeline and Mathilde are walking behind him. You have Primo and the other, armed guards there. You see all these scientists who are kind of stepping out of the way out of reverence for Safin, and you see these other guys putting these paintings of like Japanese water lilies on the wall, and it's like, okay. So he's setting up shop, and then he goes into this one room, which just feels like a total throwback to Ken Adam.
Oh, it looks amazing.
It is. It's like I'm not even sure how you would describe what this room looks like. Almost like a room in a temple or something. And they're setting up the table and the tile floors. And Oberchev is there, and he's like, yes, doc. He calls him doctor, which is interesting. Is nobody? He's not been called as a doctor. And he says, because Safin's like, well, as I, you have my request. And he's like, yes. And he gives him this little dangling like keychain of the little blood, which we understand is Heracles, but we're not sure what the significance is yet. And Safin just attaches it to his belt, and he says, come, Madeline, I want to show you something. And the door's open. You have that shot from the trailer where he's stepping into the garden. And it's kind of neat because in the trailer, they edited Madeline and Mathilde out of the shot so that, you only saw him. But you see he's there and he's walking down the steps. He's like, my father's poison garden. And he explains that it's clear. He's talking about the garden and he wants to take, Mathilde. And Madeline's like, no. But then Primo puts a gun and points it at her back. And so she reluctantly gives up her daughter and she tells her, do not touch anything. And so Safin carries her into the garden in this really creepy scene where he's walking through and he's explaining to her, not all the plants are dangerous. And she kind of looks at one in particular and he's like, oh, yes, this one, he didn't make you behave. But you don't have to. You'll behave and be good here, right? And Mathilde kind of reaches out like she wants to touch it, and Madeline's like, no, don't touch it. So she doesn't. And then Sapphin's kind of talking, and he says, oh, maybe it's time you should have a cup of tea. And she freaks out, and they seize Madeline and drag her away. And she tells Mathilde, don't worry, I will come looking for you. I'll find you. And Sapphin asks Mathilde, what do you enjoy being here? And she's like, no. He's like, oh, you will learn to love it as I did. And he's carrying her through, and it's so creepy. And you totally get what he's about at this moment. It's clear that his family was linked to the garden, and he feels a connection to his family by continuing to cultivate the garden and all the poisons, which is because we can see, of course, that it's not just his face, but presumably his whole body's been scarred by dioxin. And he doesn't, in the way that he treats Madeline like an object, he can't seem to discern the difference between love and poison at this point.
Well, and let's not forget, Mr. White took my family, and this is Mr. White's daughter.
Yeah.
Maybe I should take her daughter. That'd be great.
It's like a dual layered thing where on the one hand, he genuinely feels like he owns her in that creepy way and like an abuser in love with her in that way. But at the same time, at a subconscious level, it's like the ultimate fuck you to Mr. White that he's got his daughter captive.
I want to keep you alive. I don't know why yet. Oh, you have a daughter. That sounds like a good reason. We don't really need you anymore. We got your daughter, Chuck.
And this is another thing which I like about the masks, and what I think it also further represents is that, the fact that Sapphin basically wants to play house with Madeline and Matilda in the garden and build his own quasi-family out of this is like...
How disappointing, Mr. Bond. I thought that maybe there would be a place for you, Inspector.
Well, it's like it's like the mask. It's like he's a doll, like an expressionless type of doll. Like, oh, I'm going to play house, and how weird he is. And it's just... That kind of is the vibes I'm getting from this and the no mask that he's wearing because of how...
And I understand your creepiness. I don't mean to bash up against it. I don't mean to crash against your shore of it, but I do also see the motivations of Sapphin. And because Sapphin is the character that manipulated the death of Blofeld. So as far as I'm concerned, in terms of Bond villains, James Bond did not kill Blofeld, although he did technically. No, there was another villain. There was a bigger Bond. There's always a bigger fish.
Yes, for sure. So I just like this, how creepy this is. He's playing house. He's kind of got like a living doll, so to speak. He's just so weird. So then we cut back to the C-17, and Q's. You had that moment from the trailer where Bond and Nomi are in this thing. He's like, "Have you ever flown one of these before?" She's like, "Nope." And it's like an apparent backdoor reference to Die Another Day with the the jets that Bond and Jinx dive out of the airplane. Kind of like Felix's brand of the cigars was the same from Die Another Day as well. So they drop out, falling through the sky, and Q tells them that you're going to have to enter through the west side of the island because this is an old World War II submarine pen. They'll be at the dock, the entrance is there. So the wings open up, they fly down, they land in the water, the wings close, it becomes like this little submarine, and sure enough, they dock inside the underwater in one of the submarine pens, which I meant in the trailer for some reason made me think of Crab Key in a way, like the old bauxite mines, but it's not. So that was interesting to see. So they dock there, they get out, and Bond gets his watch and he uses it to break into the first door. They start creeping around. They start moving through these big hallways and get to this stairwell, and Q calls it a toxic merry-go-round because he's monitoring them on the smart blood on this laptop, and the feed is being transferred back to M's office where M and Moneypenny and Tanner are watching. But eventually Nomi and Bond go up the stairwell where the walls are so thick, as would be the case with this old base, that they lose reception and Q can't communicate with them anymore. So they step up inside what used to be the missile silos, and Sapphin has hollowed it out and turned it into the garden for some of the more toxic plants. And those aren't, it's not nuclear rods there, but it's actually extra chemicals and stuff that they're slowly poaching into the plants. And you have all the guys in the hazmat suits are cultivating it. Nomi shoots the first guard there with the silencer on the rifle. He falls over dead, and they creep along the side looking at this, going through the rafters, and they eventually just go into the lab. And I love how Bond just walks in here. He just immediately starts shooting up the ceiling. He's like, get in the corner. Everybody moves over to the corner in fear. And then Nomi sees Oberchev, and he's like, got him. And she does that slick move from the trailer where she just kicks him in the neck really hard. And because Oberchev is an idiot, he just doesn't know when to shut up. And Bond eventually tells her, just shut him up already. So she just kicks him even harder.
Have we talked about Oberchev and I am invincible?
I didn't get that. I guess you could put him in that vibe, but he's more cartoonish than that, I think.
Well, I'm putting him in that category. I don't know if it's a specific correlation, but I am putting him in that category.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. So Bond is setting the explosives, and then he looks at, or Nomi's setting the explosives, rather, and Bond looks at this map on the laptop. She's like, Nomi, look at this. And it's like a simulation showing how quickly the cities that Heracles is going to target, how it's going to take over. She's like, oh my God, they're going to kill millions. And of course you have Oberchev down there talking about how this is such a perfect, it's a wonderful thing. She kicks him to shut him up again. And Bond's like, okay, here, he gives her the detonator. He's like, if I don't come back, you detonate this place. She's like, we don't have enough explosives. And he's like, yeah, but they don't know that, which is great.
It was awesome.
So he takes off to go, or he's about to take off, and you hear Safin over the PA system. And this is really funny because when his voice comes over the PA, all the computers switch to these screensavers of the broken mask, which is really kind of creepy. And he tells Bond to...
but also makes no sense.
Yeah, it's a little weird. And he says, oh, Mr. Bond, come and see me if you come up here and see me, and we'll have a chat. And Bond turns to Oberchev. He's like, where's Safin? He's like, yeah, he's upstairs. So Bond leaves. And then we cut actually to the side room where Madeline has been locked up. And Primo is staring her down and tells her to drink this tea, which has 2 of the flower buds from the plant that causes you to be more subservient, which, yes, there are plants that do that, but I don't think to the level that Safin implied. But anyway.
I don't know. Have you ever had an edible?
Yeah.
Moving on.
Yes. So Primo tells her to drink it, and she doesn't really want to, and she looks at it, and she mentions how, this type of plant, if you get it, well, losing one eye is bad enough, but if you get this in your other eye, it can actually cause blindness. And he just grows up to her and grabs her by the hair, pulls her back. He's like, enough of your games, drink it. And then he takes this opportunity to splash it in his other eye. And he's like, it's kind of like pepper spray. And she takes that very brief opportunity to run for the door, get out, and lock him inside. And then she takes off to go and find, Matilda. So then we cut to Bond ascending the stairwell into this temple-like room. The guards are immediately got their guns drawn on him. You see Safin sitting there with Matilda. Another great thing in the trailer that they digitally removed her, so you didn't know she was sitting there. And Safin tells Bond to sit down, and Matilda's there, and he's talking very blatantly how this is Bond's daughter. Unclear if Bond knew for sure that was her, because he seemed very surprised, and Madeline said she wasn't. But Safin is being very blatant about this at this particular point, and he's talking about their similarities, like, oh, James Bond, history of violence, license to kill, vendetta against Ernst Stavro Blofeld, in love with Madeline Swan. I could be speaking to my own reflection. And before he even finishes, Bond cuts him off, and he's like, we've made slightly different choices. and Safin's going on about, Bond, people in the world, they always go on about the fight for independence, but they really don't want that. People like stability. They like being told how to live and to die when they're not looking. And he's like, people want oblivion. And a few of us are born to build it for them. So here I am, their invisible god, sneaking under their skin. And Bond's just looking at him like this guy's totally Looney Tunes. He's like, history isn't kind to those who play God. Like,
or, as I would like to say, our madhouses are full of people who think that they're Napoleon or God.
It's like, history isn't kind to those who play God.
I'm just saying it's a reference. It's a mirror. Everything is being held up. This is Bond 25. We are getting all of the jangly keys.
For sure. And Safin's like, oh, and you don't? We both eradicate people to make the world a better place. I just want it to be a little tidier. And Bond isn't really jiving with this, so he demonstrates to get Bond to cooperate. This little angel, she's so beautiful. She's light as a feather. And he grabs a pillow and he throws it in the air, and one of his guards shoots it. And Bond's like, oh, okay. So he just sits down and he starts apologizing. Kind of thing, and Bond also. And Bond, well, it's a trick. That's the thing.
Right.
I do like the bit where Bond goes on. He's like, this thing that you've built. I'm really sorry about the enormity of your tidy little achievement, but you're not even evening out the battlefield. You're taking everybody out of the game. Yes, I get it. You're right. You and I are similar. We both got taken out of the fight before we were even in the fight, and we both lost our parents. He's like, well, I saw my mother die right before me. He's like, what, sacrifice yours? And he's like, what, is that what happened to your mother? And Safin just gives him this look like he's just mad. And you get that he is delusional enough to think that he's going to save the world from their own from their own proclivities. And take, like, even Oberchev will mention it in a bit, talking about how, we can really help out the West African diaspora, presumably by, killing a bunch of people, and therefore there being more resources available or something. Like, they're totally batshit crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So when Bond finally sees that, because Safin makes the interesting offer. He's like, look, if you take your explosives and take your other agents and get off my island, you could take this little angel here, and he touches her on the nose, and go. And Bond's like, and Madeline is like, she stays. He's like, I can't do that. And he's like, okay. And then he grabs Madeline or Matilda and pulls her closer, and it's a really odd moment. He's like, okay, wait. And this shot where he's looking at her, and you see Safin kind of holding Matilda in his lap, and the look he's giving Bond, he almost looks childlike in this instance, with the way he's holding the kid and looking at him. And that's when Bond does the whole super apologetic thing, which at first I thought, okay, come on, Bond, what are you doing? And then we see that it's a trick, and he pulls out this gun, and he shoots the first two guys behind Safin. For the life of me, having seen the movie twice now, I'm going to have to watch it almost on freeze frame to figure out why the two gunmen who had their guns trained on Bond from behind him didn't shoot him. Because he kills these two guys and takes out those other two just like that. And in what seemed like a Temple of Doom reference to me, Safin and Matilda just disappear through this trap door, kind of like Molaram does when Indiana Jones is about to, grab him.
All right.
Through the floor, and Bond leaps across the table, but the trap door closes this time. And then he hears somebody behind him. He spins around with the gun, and it's Madeline. And he's like really shocked. And she's like, "Where's Matilda?" He's like, "Come on, we gotta go." So they take off running. Nomi, meanwhile, has grabbed Oberchev and has taken him back into the lab. And because the gunmen are starting to show up, and she realizes she's going to get outnumbered, and she tells Bond over the radio, "Bond, the reservation is bigger than the party." And so he's not responding. So she takes him back out onto the catwalk. The scientists who were hovering, cowering in the corner, all flee. She walks along with him, Oberchev along the sides, goes along the catwalk, shoots one of the guards down below that sees her, and he falls into the water and immediately starts getting dissolved, not by the nanobots, but by the toxicity in the water from the plants because they're pumping in the chemicals. And the other guy, the scientists down below are kind of shocked and surprised. They look up, and that's when Oberchev mentions that, "Look, I can really help your people in the West African diaspora. We can make it so much better." And then she tells him just to shut up, and he's like, "Oh, you bitch." He's like, I could kill your whole race if I wanted to. And then she gives him that look. And even I was like, oh, this is it. And she's like, "You know what time it is?" He's like, "What? Time to die." And she grabs him and just kicks him off the catwalk, and he falls into the toxic pool and is getting eaten alive as he should. And that's when all the scientists are like, "We're getting the fuck out of here." They're all terrified, and they start running. So then we cut to Bond and Madeline. We cut to Safin next. He's in a subterranean tunnel, which is another reference to Dr. No, where you have the circular holes in the ceiling with the grating. And they're walking along, and he's carrying Matilda, and she suddenly bites him on the hand, and he puts her down, and he's forgiving, and he's like, "If you don't want to stay with me, I'm the one who's going to be able to provide you protection. And don't you want my protection?" She's like, "No," because she wants her mommy, and he's like, "Fine, then go." So here's the only reason he took her down here. Yes, he would have liked to play house with her, but I think he was being serious. He didn't mind. He's being serious when he said to Bond, "You can take the girl and go with your explosives." Because I think the implication is that he's going to keep Madeline under the influence of so much of these drugs that he can father a child with her.
Oh, really? Okay.
That's what I got. Because that's why he's letting the kid go so flippantly. Otherwise, he certainly would have done that. She's like 5 years old. Just because she says no, if he really wants her, she's a 5-year-old. He can deal with that. But he lets her go. And it seems the other reason he took her through the trap doors is he knows that Bond wants Madeline. He knows that Bond wants to destroy the factory. But by taking Matilda down here, he knows Bond's going to want her as well. So he's making it even more complicated for Bond, another obstruction by taking her below. But he doesn't really need her. He doesn't desperately want her. He's like, "Fine, if you don't want to be with me, fine, you can go because you've served your purpose." And it's like, "I have your mom anyway." And he wants to do that. So as they're walking away,
phrasing.
So these scientists come up to him and says, "Oh, doctor, the ships are arriving. We've been hearing from M that these 2 ships without any markings on them are heading for the harbor." And even on the satellite images of Safin's Island, when they're about to first enter it, we see all these cargo containers, hundreds of them in the harbor, and they're just getting ready to presumably send the Heracles off. And one of the scientists tells Safin, "The ships are here." And he's like, "Oh, good, the first buyers have arrived." And so my assumption at this point is that he's lied to the criminal underworld and told them that, "Oh, I got this new thing where you could just get a DNA sample from the person you hate, specifically programmed to them, it'll kill them, wonderful." but he probably hasn't told him that he's actually tampered with it so that it will be lethal to entire bloodlines and like ethnicities. And this is how he's planning on distributing it around the world. And by doing it discreetly, by giving it aboard these ships, he doesn't have to worry about the fact that, Japan and Russia are nearby, because they're not going to bother him, because the island just seems to them to just be an old, World War II pen, whatever. And so the ships are closing in, which is sort of the stakes, I guess, that the ship is, which I kind of have a problem with.
And if I may,
yeah.
With the buyers coming in, kind of like Goldfinger, kind of like View to a Kill, kind of like, okay, yeah, no, please come to your doom. I'll have drinks and snacks. There will be punch and pie.
Well, yeah, and except in this case, he wants them to take the virus with them to go distribute it and to see
destroy their yeah.
I just felt with this climax that I guess I'll get to that in a second. So first we cut back to Bond and Madeline, and they're walking through one of the halls. And then they see Matilda steps out of the shadow. She's like, "Oh, mommy, I went to hide like you told me," and she's happy. And then Bond takes her and goes to unite with Nomi, and they get back on the one of the speedboats. And Bond takes off his navy sweater, gives it to Matilda, says, "It's really cold outside. You're gonna want this." And that's
finally dropped the H. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, so he gives her the. What do you mean?
You started it off very, very respectful to Mathilde.
Oh, right.
And you, over the course of this particular show, you finally just said Matilda,
right?
Which is what I was waiting for, because her name is Matilda.
Yes. So he gives her the sweater. The boat takes off with Nomi and him. He's like, "I got this handled." Meanwhile, back on the C-17. These two MiGs just buzz by the plane, which is something they actually do to send the rattle down. You get breathing down their neck, and Q contacts M. He's like, "What's going on?" He's like, "The Japanese and the Russians are breathing down our necks," but M still hasn't told anything. Which is, I was kind of happy that he said this, because I was initially wondering, like, you knew that Safin was likely on this island with his dangerous bioweapon, and you should have notified all the world's militaries, but because, or not all of the world's, but Russia, Japan, and then the American military off Okinawa for sure. But because M is still trying to cover his ass, he hasn't done that yet. And even when Bond calls him as he's moving back through the facility, and he's like, "Look, you're going to have to call in an airstrike to destroy this place." He's like, "Oh, Bond, the diplomatic situation it's kind of," he's like, "Look, M, if we don't do this, there'll be nothing left to save. Nothing left to save." Like, really giving him the business, which he should. Meanwhile, back inside Bond makes it back to the
Meanwhile, back at the base.
He makes it back to the toxic pool section, and he sets off the detonator. And all the bombs in the lab go off, killing most of those military guys and destroying their computers and whatnot. Bond shoots a bunch of other guys. He goes into this stairwell, and he just starts popping these guys. And one grenade falls down, and he picks it up, throws it back up, and then it blows up. And then 5 more grenades come down. He starts racing up the stairs. It blows up and bats him against the wall. Great action scene as he's moving up the stairwell, just taking these guys out. But then he sort of opens a door because he's trying to find his way around, and not knowing that Primo was locked in that room. So Primo just dives at him, and they tumble down the stairs. It's like a different version of your Casino Royale stairwell fight in a way. And he's fighting him, and Bond puts him in a chokehold, and he suddenly gets an idea, and he triggers Q's watch of the EMP in there, and it blows up Primo's bionic eye. And Q's like, "What's going on, Bond? It sounds like a rugby match in there." And Bond's like, "Oh, I showed this guy your watch, Q. It really blew his mind."
And this was the moment that I fell in love with this movie. And I was like, you know what? I'm good. I didn't just fall in love with this movie. This is the culmination. This is the crescendo to the Craig era.
Yeah, so he runs upstairs and he gets into the control room and he tells Q, he's like, "Q, I need power." And he says that right as he figures out how to turn on the power. And then in a classic Bond moment, Q is preparing to talk him through this overly complicated process of opening the doors, and Bond, just being the super genius that he is, knows every single switch and dial to turn to start opening the doors. And so the doors are opening, and it's a great shot where you see that the pool in the poison garden is actually one of the doors for the silo, and it opens, and all the water starts pouring back down to the pools underneath, and the other 2 doors open for the other identical silos. And this is where Bond admittedly makes kind of a mistake. He doesn't do anything to make sure that this can't be tampered with. He just kind of leaves the room. He starts making his way back down. On his way out, he tells M to call the missile strike. And Q's like, "But Bond, you need to get..." He's like, "Call the strike now." So M signals the HMS Dragon. They fire the missiles, and they're inbound. And Q's like, okay, you got so minutes to get out of here. He's like, okay. But he's making his way back down the base, and all of a sudden the doors start closing.
Yep.
Like, no, 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 no. So he starts racing back. On his way, he sees Mathilde's her little bunny rabbit doll, which this is a moment that I kind of teared up in because I knew what was coming at this point. So he picks it up, he puts it in his belt. There's the classic moment from the trailer where somebody's shooting, and he spins and shoots like in a reference to the gun barrel logo. But he's racing back up to get back to the control room, and he cuts.
Which also, I have to give credit to Cary Fukunaga for not only having the traditional gun barrel sequence, but also incorporating one of his own directorial flourishes upon that, which is something that is distinct to the Daniel Craig era.
Yes, and so I admit I did start almost like crying when he saw the animals. I knew this is like where it's getting really sad because you know what's coming, and just the creepiness. So he takes off there. He starts running across the poison garden because now the door.
This is where I got excited. This is where I'm leaning. Yes. And again, I saw this on the thing, and I'm holding onto my steering wheel, and I'm like, kill him.
Yeah, and I was waiting because for a while you haven't seen Safin for a little bit. I'm like, where is he? And I assumed he was the one who was closing the doors again. And admittedly, one of the problems I have with this is that as far as stakes go, I get realistically that the missiles would bounce off the thing. Well, if that were to happen, all M has to do is tell the Russians and the Japanese and the Americans what's going on, and they'll go wholesale invasion of that island and destroy it and sink the two ships. It's like it feels like there's no immediate threat because we'll
get to that when we get to the end.
So Bond's running across the pool, and suddenly Safin just pops out from the other side, shoots his gun, and he shoots Bond in like the stomach. And then he walks closer and very deliberately, and then he shoots him like 3 more times, like really brutally. And he's commenting on Bond. Oh, look at you, Seth. You're such an animal. And Bond just freaks out and like an animal. He grabs Safin, body slams him into the water. He starts banging his right arm on the ground to try and get him to drop the gun. And in a really brutal moment, Bond breaks Safin's arm, which is like, oh shit. They did a good job of covering it so they can maintain the rating. And they didn't have as much of a bone crunching sound effect, probably for that same reason. But it's like, oh Jesus! And Safin, looking evil as ever, just it picks up something. He smacks Bond in the side of the cheek, and then
quick question.
Yeah.
Would you have liked to have seen Daniel Craig's James Bond brutally destroy Christoph Waltz's Blofeld in this fashion?
If Blofeld had been a more effective villain in the last movie, then yes.
Oh, but Safin was an effective villain, and so I was really happy when he was brutalizing this guy.
Safin is effective villain. Blofeld was not.
Agreed.
But I would have liked to see him do that to Blofeld if Blofeld had been a more effective villain, which I don't think he was. So,
but I'm just okay. Keep going.
Yeah, so he's body slams Safin, and he breaks his arm, and Safin smacks Bond along the side of the cheek, and Bond's like, "What's going on?" Feels kind of flustered for a moment. And then, the really sad music kicks in, and Safin opens his hand, and you see that it's the vial. And Bond's like, "What is this?" And he's like, "I gave you a choice. You made me do this." And he's like, "Now you can never kiss them, never touch them again." And Bond realizes, oh shit, this has been coded to, obviously not Matilda's DNA, because otherwise that would kill Bond as well, but coded to Madeline's DNA, so he can't get near either of them ever again. And Safin gets into this weird, like this, making it like a Greek tragedy, saying, "Oh, both of our heroes finding ourselves in our tragedies of our own making." And Bond realizing he's almost out of it at this point because he realizes that he's never going to see them again. It's like a Total Majesties type ending. But Bond kind of...
And an incredible performance by Daniel Craig.
Oh, for sure. And even by Rami Malek in the scene, just how he's just maintaining the look. And Bond kind of carelessly reaches into the water, picks up the gun, points it at Safin, who's got this look, like, like he's really sadistic, and then Bond just very carelessly just shoots him dead 3 times in the head.
It's amazing.
It is amazing. And then Bond turns and he starts making his way back into the control room. He opens the doors again, and then he calls Q, and he very desperately, probably the most desperate moment I've ever heard in Daniel Craig's Bond. He's like, "Are you sure, Q? There's no way to get this out of you." He's like, "No, Bond, you have it forever." He's like, "Are you sure?" He's like, "Yes." What's going? And then Q's like, "Oh my god!" And he's like, "Madeline," because he's figured it out what Bond's talking about. And he's like, "Patch me through the Madeline." He's like, "Oh yes, of course. I'm so foolish." So he contacts Nomi, and we see that they're on this island. Which, by the way, M also mentioned that this island is in a chain on the Keys. He called it. sort of like a reference, crab key kind of thing. And Madeline and Matilda are kind of playing on the shore, and Naomi takes her earpiece out. She's like, "Here, it's Bond," and she talks to him, and she's like, "Oh, you okay?" It's like Bond's like, "All right, he's dead. It's over. He's dead." And he tells her that, "Am I gonna get it?" And she figures it out, and she's like, "Oh God, that he's programmed the virus for that." And he eventually makes it. Bond makes it up this ladder up onto the surface, and he sees you see the missiles coming in, and she says, "She has your eyes," and he says, "I know." And she's like, "Oh, how are we going to go on without you?" And he says, "Don't worry, you have all the time in the world." And then the missiles land. It's the type of missiles which, when they get there, they like split apart into several smaller missiles, and they totally destroy the base. They incinerate 007, James Bond, killing him. And the screen kind of goes into a bright whiteout as the explosives just taking out the island. We then see Q looking at the screen on the wall, showing all of Bond's life signs are down to 0. M is just looking totally despondent, and as well as looking very guilty. Moneypenny is almost starting to break up as well, and Madeline is starting to cry, and Nomi's kind of handling it. She's kind of like fine with it. And then we have like a big, bright whiteout for the screen, and it bleeds into a return to London, where M, Q, Tanner, and Moneypenny and Nomi are in M's office, and he's got a little shot glass poured, and the rest of them do, and he's going to have a toast to Bond, and he reads a passage from, quoting Bond's obituary from You Only Live Twice, the novel, where he says, man's purpose is to live, not merely to exist. And I can't remember the second half of the line. I'm sorry. So they give a toast to Bond, and then he says very directly, "All right, back to work." So he puts the glass down, and then cuts to Madeline and Mathilda, and they're driving in the V8 Vantage Volante back in Matera, and she's like, "Mathilda, I want to tell you a story about a man named Bond, James Bond." As they drive into the tunnel, and they play the song by Louis Armstrong, "We Have All the Time in the World," and it's not until the very, very end of the last second where it says James Bond will return. And that is the film No Time to Die. Now, one of the things I love about this movie is that I feel it's my favorite straight up espionage story, because again, you have the CIA, MI6, Spectre, and Safin all fighting for control of this virus, and it's like you don't really know where the story's going, which I like. Unlike, say, From Russia with Love, where they tell you what the villain's plan is up front, or For Your Eyes Only, where I just thought I didn't really invest in many of the characters. Here, I just love the espionage. The Cuba sequence is so much fun. I admit that it's a little contrived, saying that how convenient that all the Spectre agents were at the party, and the way Blofeld, but I get that they do a better job at dealing with the Spectre baggage here than Spectre did dealing with the Quantum baggage.
If I may interrupt, well, also, let's not forget the Quantum is just a subsidiary of Spectre. Again, as I mentioned, they all have franchises. And also, okay, so if the people at the party, if their genetic line is affected, so we didn't just affect the people who were at the party, we affected anyone who was. So even if you weren't at the party and you had brushed up against someone, it was like you went to a wedding, you went to a birthday. It doesn't matter if it happens next week or in 3 years' time. If you were a part of Spectre and you were not at that party, and somehow, some way, that genetic information had been passed, then when you two meet up, you are dead.
Well, there's only two ways it would really transfer. One is the way that we saw in the movie, where the family members go to the funeral and actually physically touch the body.
Right, but what about all the other people who kissed the lips of the bodies?
The second way it would transfer is that other people at the party who did not die, or even the police who come and collect the bodies, they get the nanobots from just touching them. And if they come in contact with their families at any point, then you're right, they would then die. And you're right, it could happen years later. But it would only be for the Spectre-related bloodlines. But again, assuming that once Q told him that, this is what the thing does, because Q did mention that because we're going to have to isolate the other Spectre, their family members, and M or Q mentions that in that scene. So they're trying to isolate them to prevent them. But you're right, even if you isolate them just long enough to get rid of the bodies, if they come into contact with anybody who physically handled that body to dispose of it, then they're dead.
Yeah. Like my best friend from high school who goes to my dad's funeral, I didn't go to the funeral. And he was at that party, and it, like, let's say it's like a Catholic funeral, and everybody's kissing people and whatever. That as soon as you go to the funeral, once you've interacted with someone who has interacted with the body, then you are carrying the nanobots, and thusly, when I meet my friend from high school, all of a sudden, I'm going to turn into, the mutated guy from RoboCop.
That's true. Same with the people who handle Blofeld's body at the prison.
Oh, know what an MI6 and I guess that's good. All the MI6 people are going to instantly kill Spectre people,
unless they had. Well, by then they were probably smart enough to send guys in with hazmat suits to dispose of it. But yeah, it's sort of I get that it could go on. But what I love about this movie also is that I think the banter is really great.
Yes.
The Yonomi and Paloma are amazing. I didn't feel like it was missing anything by not having him sleep with either of them. I love how the climax is just a total throwback to classic Bond. And just, classic Bond villain. I do think, given the blatant references to Dr. No with what people thought at first might have been the dextrocardia and the colorful polka dots throughout the main title sequence.
And even in the trailers when we were seeing things that looked so much, you mentioned Ken Adams' set design,
yes,
and even from that where oh my God, the guy who picks up the spider in Dr. No.
Right, and so it's kind of like in Skyfall, they kept when it leaked that Moneypenny was going to be the Naomi Harris character, they kept saying no, and then it turned out here. Or in Spectre, they're like, oh, he's going to be Blofeld. No. So I wonder if at some point maybe they were going to make him Dr. No, and then cooler heads prevailed and said, the fact that fans were guessing this as early as the title reveal, maybe they just decided, we probably shouldn't do that. It's like, well, cherry pick from the movie or cherry pick from the character, but maybe we shouldn't go out of it because even again, when one of the scientists calls Safin a doctor, and the way he's dressed, the way his hair is parted the exact same way, the sets, and the fact that the island's along the Keys, and all of that stuff made me think Dr. No, even though he's not.
But it is referential to it, and I think that after 25 James Bond movies, they are very good at referencing, and especially when you are seeing the bow of a James Bond actor, there are references. So anniversaries, denouements, they are things that the James Bond franchise does extraordinarily well. And so I don't think so, because I think that it would have taken away from and aside from naming him Dr. No.
Yeah.
At that point, it's okay, now I think that is the ultimate jangly keys.
Right. And that's why, but I was still wondering if they might have been going in that direction. Because even in Rami Malek's interviews, he says things like, when they ask him, well, did you look to any other Bond villains for inspiration? Well, only Dr. No. It's like, well, there's rumors that you're Dr. No. Oh, I wouldn't shoot that down. Oh, what about your character's name? He's Safin. Oh, well, that's not really finalized yet. And the fact that they just kept playing around with it, I'm like, why are you even teasing this type of thing instead of just shutting it down immediately, which is a little weird. But
to be fair, actors are the last to know.
Yeah, I love also the
craft services, then actors.
The ending is basically riffed, straight from Majesty's, where once again, the villain has robbed Bond's family of him, but in a different way this time. Mm-hmm. And how do you feel about Bond basically deciding that it's not so much that he sacrificed himself to save the world, because he could have left. He just decided that life was not worth living if I can't go back to them, and just lets himself be incinerated.
Well, and I think that's part of the reason why I really enjoy this movie, as not only as a James Bond movie, but as a Daniel Craig James Bond movie, is because James Bond is a sensualist. And if he cannot enjoy life, what's the line from you know what I'm talking about, that Robert Carlyle movie?
What's the point no point in living if you can't feel alive?
Exactly. And that is what I felt. As soon as he started saying no, 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 I was like, kill him. James Bond is going to die today. There is no time to die. Sure there is. Right now.
Killed off so many characters.
Well, and that's it. And I'm fine with it. Okay, so in terms of that, I felt that this movie incorporated so many of the James Bond tropes without feeling like tropes. It involved so many of the James Bond charm that hadn't been not even present until now. The moment that I had been waiting for in a James Bond movie, when is Daniel Craig going to be James Bond? It was the day he died in the movie No Time to Die. It was awesome. I loved it. And the thing is, and as I mentioned before, now I can pepper all of the James Bond movies within these brackets. Casino Royale, No Time to Die. And the only thing that I will not forgive is a lack of mention of Tracy, but we have surrogates. We have Vesper, we have Madeline. Like, everything about this is the character. If you would like to... Okay, so if you have friends who have never seen James Bond before, I would say, here are 5 movies. And if you would like to explore the more flippant, the more exciting, the different interpretations, the cover songs, the different eras of career, the reasons that made them stellar, and the low points that made them worthy of parody in Austin Powers movies or Archer, as I've been referencing several times. Like, it is a spanning idea of James Bond in the Craig movies, and I am so surprised, honestly, that this movie just tied the whole room together.
Yeah, it does feel like there's a lot of references in there. He does feel a hell of a lot like James Bond throughout the climax, especially...
Sorry, what was the question?
You were talking about how he just feels like James Bond. And so I do like that they're bringing back more of the quips and adding levity into intense situations. That's great. I love that, it's the espionage story. I like that it is drawing from Fleming. Like, some people say, oh, this is a misunderstanding of the character. Oh, he wouldn't have a kid. This would be all this. It's like, actually, it is in the books, And Fleming, much like other authors before him, like Arthur Conan Doyle, he tried to end this series a few times. Like, Majesty was seemingly on its way to ending as Driving Off into the Sunset, Happily Ever After. But then it's like the publisher, comes knocking. It's like, hey, these movies are coming. So it's like, oh, okay. So then he changed it. So Blofeld kills Tracy instead. And You Only Live Twice, the novel, when you think about it, at the start of it, he's really depressed and in a funk because his wife's dead. And it's M who tries to drag him out and send him on this mission, but which turns into more of a very personal vendetta that Bond has against Blofeld, with the whole poison garden and on the isle, all of that taken from the novel You Only Live Twice. But the additional act, like the extended epilogue, if you will, where he's living with amnesia with Kissy Suzuki and it gets her pregnant and he doesn't know it and she doesn't want a shotgun wedding. And so she is waiting for him to propose and he never does because Fleming once again changes the ending and decides, well, how about he sees something that jogs his memory so he leaves? Well, in doing that, it sort of made that entire epilogue unnecessary. It's like, okay, there's this epilogue here that goes on for quite a while, but it didn't really amount to anything. Because he never finds out her secret and he just leaves, and Fleming never revisited it in his other books because he went on to write other Bond adventures. So you can tell that there were various points where Fleming tried to end the character. And much like how Conan Doyle decided, well, I'm kind of bored writing this Sherlock character, I'm just going to kill him. And in a really contrived way, for the first time and only time ever, he created the Moriarty character and says, oh, this is a supervillain I've never written about before, who Sherlock's been trying to follow because he's trying to play up Sherlock's death as being a significant thing until he got so much pressure from fans and publishers to bring the character back, which he eventually did a cheap retcon of it. But I feel that's kind of what Fleming was on his way to doing anyway. He wanted to end the character. He got pressured to keep going. So I think this ending is more on point with James Bond. I don't picture him being the regular family man and being able to settle down like that. Because in the books, he's kind of like a borderline psychopath. Such a person isn't going to be able to just settle down and be a regular family man for very long. So here, I think it actually worked very well. So I just feel the Craig era as a whole draws much more from a few different corners of Fleming. Casino Royale, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and You Only Live Twice, the novels for those, by the way. And I feel that this really works as an ending. I don't think they'll ever do it again, though, killing him off in this manner. Because
Oh, no, Kat, my favorite thing about this movie is that it's going to be the one where James Bond dies. This is what we're going to refer to it as. It's like, which one is your favorite? I don't know, the one where he dies.
Yeah, I do. I absolutely love the film. I like that they even got all the cameos they could from the Aston Martins, but it didn't feel as in your face as it did in the promos. Like, I'm like, Jesus, we got the DB5, we got the Vantage, we got the Super Allegro, we got the Valhalla. Isn't this a bit much? But then you watch it in the movie, and it's like, oh, actually, this isn't really as much as I thought it was going to be, which is kind of nice. And hands down, I think the DB5 scene here is the best DB5 scene because I think the cinematography for it is really legit. It's a fun chase sequence, and as cool as the ejector seat was in Goldfinger, it always felt like it had a tad bit of a buzzkill because once Bond hit the ejector seat, he kind of hits the brakes. It stops for a bit before he takes off again. Whereas here, it doesn't do that. It's like you have that really tense scene where they're all closing in and blasting him to smithereens before he picks up the Gatling guns and we're off to the races. So I really loved that bit for the.
I do really appreciate a defensive vehicle, and I do appreciate it when the person who is in control of the particular tank knows what they're doing. And so to just sit there and allow themselves, like when Bond is sitting there in the DB5 and just being like shot at, right? I'm like, that is nerves of steel. And that is something that has been defined as being a James Bond trait in all of these films. Yeah. And so it's really, really cool, even just to have the interaction with another character who is like, I'm not sure about this, James. And even though it is dramatic for modern audiences, and in the performance, Léa Seydoux is amazing in this movie.
So much better than in the last one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I liked her better in the last one than you did. But like everything about this is just, he is, when he is confronted with something that is out of his control, he still takes control. And it's unique to this film. Everything else I don't know. He's not. He was finally James Bond. Long live James Bond.
Yeah, another thing I like about this movie is given what I mentioned earlier about the theme about how everybody wants control of this thing and Bond says, well, none of you should have it. I feel that gets us to really bond with him so much more. So it feels like we're much more akin to Bond throughout the movie. Because like even in the climax, he's still trying to cover his ass and pretend like, we have to avoid an international incident. I'm like, are you kidding him? You've already had one in Cuba. They're going to trace this virus back to Heracles at some point, And
well, it does sort of contradict the only thing that I feel about James Bond, and I think that other people that we've talked to agree with this, and other people who are watching may agree with this. But I never took James Bond as being anti-authority or anti. Yeah, he wasn't anti-authoritarianism. Good enough. So when he was adversarial with M, and I don't feel that this James Bond, Daniel Craig's James Bond, was ever particularly on Her Majesty's Secret Service. He was drafted because he was an orphan. He was raised as a child to be a murderer. And then they made him a murderer. And so now we get to the point where he actually regained his humanity, and he atones for his sins.
So, yeah, I do feel that that's one of the other faults of the film is that, or not the film, I mean the whole Craig era, is that you have the definitive beginning of James Bond.
Yes.
Which has its own addendum with Quantum of Solace, which I think works still because he's still very much the blunt instrument. Whereas in Skyfall, Spectre, and No Time to Die, it's sort of the running theme that, MI6, the whole 00 section is outdated. We don't need you anymore. And Bond repeatedly showing them that they do. And it's sort of the end of his tenure. You're right. He never was on His Majesty's service, really, because in Casino Royale, M is ready to feed him to the dogs, but she's kind of patient to feel like, well, he's on to something, and he doesn't really know what it is. Whereas in Quantum, he's pretty much, once again goes rogue a little bit to try and, figure out what's going on. Skyfall, yeah, he goes dark for a few months, and because she just decides to trust him again because she really does care about Bond and decides, well, even though he's not ready to go back into the field, I'm going to earn his trust again by sending him out there anyway because I know he can get the job done. And it felt more like Bond taking it personal as unfinished business as opposed to just being another job. And then in Spectre, I admit they downplayed the whole Bond is over the hill thing. I actually felt that Craig's performance was younger in Spectre than he was in Skyfall. But again, he's going rogue in that movie as well and following the sort of personal breadcrumb trail for not so much for the former M as for Olivia personally. And yeah, in this movie, once again, he's going rogue again. So you're right. He never really was on Her Majesty's Secret Service. And I think that's one of the flaws of the Craig era is that you have the beginning and you have the ending, a protracted beginning but no ending, which is why I believe my theory that I floated when we did our Skyfall review is correct, that this Craig era is a Venn diagram, with Skyfall being overlapping in the middle. That the first three films are the protracted origin story, such that if they're still making Bond films 50 years from now, regardless of what the geopolitical situation is, if somebody asked me how did Bond get his start, I would say watch the first three Craig movies.
Agreed.
Whereas the last three Craig movies does this other trilogy, like I mentioned, of Bond's over the hill, the 00 section isn't needed. And
there are 5 movies. You keep saying the first 3 in the last. Oh, you said Venn diagram. I apologize.
Venn diagram. So, and that we need to cancel Bond and send him back to the 1960s where he's more at home. And those last 3 movies are really making the case that no, Bond is still just as relevant in today's world as he was in the last. And so that's an interesting way to look at those 5 movies. But I do admit, I would have loved to see a classic Bond movie where he is on Her Majesty's Secret Service and goes on a mission. Like maybe a couple of those. Like that promise at the end of Skyfall, that's what he was going to do, never really got fulfilled, which is why I feel that I think my favorite movie with Bond and Mallory is Skyfall, because they do end up on good terms by the end of it and really trustworthy. And that was a great performance and set us up for what was going to be, or what I thought was going to be, a wonderful relationship for films to come. But then no, Spectre, we had to throw that away, and now No Time to Die. I mean, I admit one of the big surprises of this movie is the fact that M is the one who's sort of unwittingly spearheaded this whole thing. And like they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, as you mentioned. And so it is, and the fact that it is very adversarial, even in the climax, the fact that M has not simply called, the Japanese Self-Defense Force, the American Navy off Okinawa, and the Russians, and told them what's going on, because he still wants to cover his ass on this, despite knowing that there's a massive Heracles factory there, which is why I felt the stakes weren't really there. Because even if the doors stay shut and the missiles bounce off, at that point, M is just going to have to fess up to the Russians and the Japanese as to what's going on. And like I said, they would just invade the island wholesale and they would sink the 2 ships. And that would kind of be the end of it. And so I didn't feel like it was the stakes were as there as it could have been in the end. And it feels like M is being a bit selfish in that, yeah, I could have brought in the whole movie, everything I needed to take care of this, but I'm still interested in covering my ass, to avoid the international. And so that was a little iffy, but I still really loved the climax and think it really works very well. So I really liked all that. I think it's a very good movie. I didn't feel the runtime at all.
Nor did I.
And the fact that the whole middle of the movie is not the action stuff. It's the, back at MI6 and, Madeline's office with Safin and talking with Blofeld and going to Cuba.
Yeah, but Cuba.
Yeah, and going back to Norway. Well, that's in the first hour of the movie. But that whole section, 45 minutes, is very much characters and story, and I liked that because it's a Bond movie, again, that's trusting that the characters and the story is compelling enough to keep you engaged and not just shoehorning in like action after action like you saw in like Quantum or whatnot. And even though the references are here, like I said, it's references done right because it doesn't come at the expense of the story. So I absolutely love this movie.
So how many martinis?
Ooh, I'm tempted to give it 10 martinis.
Did we already do martinis on Saturday?
You did, but I wasn't sure yet. I saw it a second time, and even though I feel the first half is a bit stronger than the second half, I do feel that I still really love this movie. I can't wait to have the Blu-ray or the 4K even. And I do give it, I'm going to give it 10 martinis. This was stellar. It's such a unique Bond film, granted, but because it's like you said, it's the ending of James Bond, and like all those movies take place between the two, figuratively speaking. So I love it. I can't wait to see it again. I think the actors knocked it out of the park. The action's great. The pacing's great. The direction is stellar.
The characterization is great.
Absolutely. And then I like other callbacks like I didn't mention is how
the music is fantastic.
Yeah. Or like how
the score is incredible.
And then you have other callbacks, like in Quantum of Solace, Felix betrays the CIA to help Bond because he doesn't like what they're doing. Whereas in this movie, it's the other way around, where Bond sort of betrays MI6 by helping it. So there's all these little other references throughout the film that I really love. And because it's done in a more natural way. It's not at the expense of the story. So, yeah, I'm going to give it 10 martinis. I cannot wait to see it again. This is an excellent James Bond film.
Do you remember what I gave it last time? I feel like I gave it an 8 or a 9.
You were teetering on both.
Yeah, still. I'm going to give it a 9. And again, I haven't seen it again. I am looking forward to seeing it again. But the thing that pushes it to a 9, and the reason that it's not a 10, I want my dad to see it. He won't go to a theater to watch a 2 hour and 45-minute movie. He won't do it. So I am waiting for it to show up on physical media, and then I'll show it to my dad. But I am going to highly recommend and be like, come on, this is awesome. This is a James Bond movie. This is the kind of movie that I grew up, my dad being like, do you want to see a kick-ass action movie? Yes. And knowing the history, and also before we, not before, after. It also says James Bond will return. Yes. There is still a tilt to the future in this James Bond movie.
And on there that is, note, when I was in the theater, I was waiting for that moment to come up, and my friend kind of wanted to go. I'm like, no, we got to see this. So it comes up, we see the logos, and I'm like, okay, where is it? And because usually the last logos will show like the corporate logos as well as the title logo on the same frame. But this one didn't do that. All the corporate logos fade out. I'm like, what's going on? And then you see it say, the classic logo, No Time to Die. And then the title fails that, but the 007 is still there. And I'm waiting. It's like, is it coming? Because I feel the lights are about to come back on. And then those best words ever in cinema, James Bond will return. And I was like, okay, yes, I got it. Now I can go now. Which puts to rest any rumors that they're going to, that Nomi will just be the new 007 and there won't be another James Bond. It's like, no, there will be another James Bond, another reboot, what have you, coming down the line. However, I do think that because once upon a time they did write an actual Jinx script and almost made it, that with Amazon taking over, it is possible that
you and your Jinx.
That it is. I'm saying it's possible that Paloma and Nomi could show up in their own spin-off thing on Amazon Prime or whatever. It's possible. I don't know, because spin-off things. I mean, because Barbara Michael said that James Bond specifically will remain a theatrical engagement. But if Barbara herself was the one who was so eager to make the Jinx movie in the first place and was really upset that it didn't happen, then I don't think she would be opposed to them doing spin-offs for Paloma and Nomi. And it speaks to what Barbara said back in January 2020 that James Bond will always be a man. And she doesn't like the idea of making him a woman because there's much more interesting roles for women, period. And I think she proved that with the female characters in this film. And I thought, absolutely have Paloma or Nomi show up in another. And when I say spinoff, that doesn't mean it has to be taking place after No Time to Die. It could just take place before, so you don't have to acknowledge that or have any references to it. But I think that's a possibility. But I would not be opposed to seeing that because I loved it. And a lot of people were saying they had a problem with Paloma not being in the movie very long. And I admit that was one of my fears because we knew she was sort of shoehorned in really late. But I think it actually worked just right because it leaves you wanting more. And from that moment out, the movie gets kind of more serious, like tonally. So I think she was there for just the right amount of time, like a perfect little like martini in the theater, so to speak.
I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but I found her in effervescence at the beginning of the film, coupled with lighter, knowing that they were both CIA, that brought a lot of life after the heaviness of, we've already seen Madeline and Safin, and we're moving for, and Bond has been betrayed, and he's had to, Rick Blaine, his girlfriend, onto a train, and everything was so, and I was like, yeah, no, we're just in for another Daniel Craig movie. And then it got to Paloma and lighter, and it was just like, yeah, no, this is actually, oh my, this is fun. This is a kind of fun that I haven't felt in a James Bond movie since Casino Royale. Yeah, or even, I haven't even been this confused since Quantum of Solace. I know I was supposed to be reverent in Skyfall, and Spectre, it's funny how Spectre is sort of it's the one with Christoph Waltz.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic because this movie you could say is arguably one of the darkest in the Craig era. It's the tonally and all that. But despite that, I also feel it's the funnest of the Craig era because, like you said, he feels like legit James Bond. You have the wonderful banter with the characters, the jokes and the humor's landing, and even the stuff that they're more subtle about. They don't want to be too in your face, like with all the stuff at Q's house. So I love this. It's like this feels like a vintage James Bond movie while simultaneously doing things that a Bond movie normally wouldn't do. And so I would say that, yes, bring Cary Fukunaga back at some point. He says he's busy, tied up right now, but maybe get Martin Campbell first because he says he wants to do, if he did another one, it would have to be the first because everything comes in threes. But I would definitely say they got to revisit Cary Fukunaga at some point because this was just fantastic.
Well, and also one of the unsung heroes, I suppose. I don't know if it was scripting or if it was dialogue punch up, but Phoebe Waller-Bridge was involved.
Yeah,
And
I think
I don't necessarily know if that was plot points or if that was just.
I read that was more about punching up some of the dialogue, and I suspect that that would.
Well, then all I have to say is she gave it life. If it was just dialogue, then she gave it life. And I did, as I mentioned before in the last video, like there were moments where I was like, Phoebes. But yeah, like the fun of a James Bond movie. And so for anybody who was saying that she was, I don't know, doing stuff and invoking or injecting ideologies or whatever, no. She Kevin Smithed up things, but with talent.
Yeah,
Sorry, Kev.
I did not at all feel like there were too many cooks in the kitchen with the writing. I think the writing went very smoothly. Even though, and the reason I still give it 10 martinis, even though some of my criticisms of how they handled some of the stuff, is because, like you said, it feels like a vintage James Bond movie, and to be able to do that while still taking a lot of big risks with it, even though those risks, I mean, they're risks in the sense that they haven't ever.
Well, killing James Bond is a major risk.
Well, I mean, in terms of diving into certain corners of Fleming that exist, just haven't been tapped on screen before, you could say that's a risk, but it works. I found. I love this movie. I give it 10 martinis. I cannot wait to see it again.
All right, you get 9 martinis. This movie gets 9 martinis. You are a positive influence.
That's very good. So, speaking of positive influences, do we have any voices in the chat?
We have a couple. I said, Captain Deckard Spock is here. Live and let no time to die.
Yes,
absolutely. And I thought that was the only thing you were going to take off. Todd Michael was being quite gracious in regards to my technical deficiencies. I apologize for the intro, everyone. Anyone who's watching, once you get past through the first 2 minutes, everything's fine. I don't know what this says. Do you know what this says? It looks German.
I'm not sure. Like that.
I'm going to take German off the screen because I'm afraid of it. Oh, no. Nolodoc says more other things.
Okay, that's Polish. I don't know what he's saying.
Oh, okay. Captain Deckard Spock says, hate the sin, love the sinner. With a praying hand. We love you, Scotty, and Catherine, too. Yes, well, thank you so much, Captain.
Spock. Thanks for supporting the show.
Tom Jr. Jackson was here. Hello, all.
Hello, Tom.
Next time, capital H, Tom. Chin up.
Thanks for being on the show last Saturday, Tom.
Absolutely. That was a really good conversation. And you know what? Oh, where is it? I found it. I can't. There is never mind. We'll get to it when we get to it, because there was a moment where Tom said that this film brought him to tears.
Really?
Several times, and he's not ashamed to say it. That's what I read while I was going through the chat. And you know what? I don't want to say that it brought me to tears, but it did well up emotion, and there were tears in my eyes, which I guess means that it brought me to tears. But like, it was an emotional. I was so happy that this movie happened.
Yeah.
This has been a rocky journey.
Worth the wait.
Yes. Sorry, I got distracted. Everyone was talking Polish.
What else?
Tom says, I really love this movie, and I have it on pre-order.
Yes. So do I.
Captain says, I can't get away from the Bond canonical verisimilitude question.
Yeah, that's the whole thing about how all the movies are trying to, at least up until the Craig era, they're trying to suggest that all of them, the first 20, were part of the same continuity, with all these various callbacks to each other, kind of like when Roger Moore visits Tracy's grave, and with Lazenby, obviously a pickup when they keep referencing the previous Connery films, and then Diamonds Are Forever begins with referencing Lazenby's film. So I admit that's something I've always been bothered by, because, again, I always regard it as it's just another James Bond movie. I don't think much about the continuity or the lack of logic that it's the same guy and the same people throughout all the years. And because to me, the actors are so variably different with their take on the character that I always treat it as a different continuity anyway, even though you have the same actors for MQ and Moneypenny coming back. So kind of like, again, like I mentioned with George Miller when he made his Mad Max 4, he's like, dude, it's a Mad Max movie. Just enjoy it. Stop worrying about whether it's a prequel, reboot, or a sequel or a remake, And so I get that. Absolutely, that makes sense, Captain Deckard Spock. I agree with you that it is a bit weird that you would have to be 90 years old the way the movies are trying to sell it, which is why I think it's more of a very loose, figurative sort of continuity.
Tom Jr. Jackson says, I still think that this movie is a love letter to the Bond films and books. But in other news, because, how can Bond be 5 people?
Well, yet how can Bond be one 90-year-old man? You're right. He can't be 5 people. He can't be a 90-year-old man, which is why these are all, to me, figurative. So when they have these fourth wall breaking references, like in Die Another Day, you go into Q Branch and you see all of the gadgets from. I feel like that's something that maybe wasn't even in the script. Like they just threw that in there because, hey, it's a 40th anniversary movie. Let's reference stuff. But trying to say that it's part of the canon, I don't know. Yeah, because it would make me very weirded out too if I put too much thought into it.
Well, and also, thank you so much for supporting the channel, Captain Deckard Spock. He has his own channel.
Yes, absolutely.
He streams frequently. And you know what? If you go to his channel and you happen to be in the chat, bring up Blade Runner and ask him if Rachel is a replicant. Nolodoc says, Wizards did it.
Yeah, probably. Technical difficulties.
Tom said, my question is why the hosts never drink martinis while discussing Bond, and then I remember Scott is allergic to them. No, heavens, no, I just don't have a proper martini glass.
I'm not drinking martinis as I generally don't care for the taste of alcoholic beverages that much. I never did acquire a taste for them. I mean, I agree it looks really classy when you see it in movies and stuff. I could never, getting it down is half the battle. It's like, me and alcohol have never really mixed.
Well, and you know what the worst part about alcohol, and I learned this when it was the 90s, you look really badass while you're drinking booze, but unfortunately, after the fact, a lot of effects.
Yeah.
So if you go and pound a squishy made of all syrup, you're not using a machine gun, I'm just telling you.
Yeah. Operate heavy machinery after drinking this martini.
True story. James Bond doesn't adhere to these rules. Tom Jr. Jackson says, I stand by my review of the film. I liked it, and also it didn't feel like a 2 hour and 43-minute film. I think it was fun and a good time watching.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed.
You know what's better than the movie, though? Like, I'm going to re-listen to your description of it like it was the audiobook. It's so more interesting. Tom continues, they basically wrapping up from Casino Royale to No Time to Die with love and Easter eggs galore.
I see what you did there, Tom. Yeah, Fabergé eggs and galore, pussy galore, yeah.
Like Octopussy galore?
Yeah.
Is that exactly what you just said? I'm sorry. I'm scanning. Tim's talk. No one was bonding with James, Scotty. What? Hey, Tim.
Yeah, hey, Tim. Nice to see you.
Yeah, no, it's good to see you. I hate to be so rude upon our introduction. No, Tim's talk has absolutely go check out his stuff. He's got some amazing short videos. Like and subscribe and all. Yeah, and he does live streams as well. He saw the Venom movie. So thanks for stopping by. Oh my stars, I can't even pronounce this.
All right, I'll pronounce it. The voice of actress Gray Delisle Griffin has recorded a version of You Only Live Twice, and the single is out now. A great version, too. Well, I will keep my eyes peeled for it.
Well, no, if you're not a fan of the Fantasmagorium Facebook page, there's a Fantasmagorium Facebook page. You can join the group, and we'll probably post that song because I'm really interested. Tom, send me the link. I want to hear this song. I honestly, Tom goes on. Tom, thank you so much for being so verbose. I honestly think that Bond will be in theaters till Barbara and Wilson retire. Oh, I got to do this.
There we go.
There it is. You say it then.
I honestly think that Bond will be in the theaters till Barbara and Wilson retire from the franchise, and then Amazon will do what they wish with the film series. Okay, about that. I was watching the live stream of the world premiere a couple weeks ago, and right before they rolled the movie, Barbara and Michael were on stage, and Barbara started waxing rhapsodical about Michael Wilson's contributions, but he didn't return the favor. It's almost like she was making it sound like this might be his last one, because he is 79 this year, so I wouldn't be surprised if he retires. Barbara might still keep going, but that's kind of feeling I got from it. But it should be noted that Michael's son Greg has been an associate producer on all the Bond films since The World Is Not Enough. So, oh
my God, I want this legacy.
What
is Greg's middle initial?
I don't know.
It better be W.
So I believe that he will probably be the one eventually to take the reins at some point. I don't agree.
I hope so.
Yeah, I don't agree with the fans who seem to think that, oh, these movies are taking so long to come out that they don't even like making them anymore. So why? It's like, dude, that had nothing to do with it. And so I think that they're not having any intention to sell. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so protective of. Like, Barbara's been putting her foot down quite a lot lately, saying, no, these will be theatrical only engagements. Bond is going to stay a man and not a woman. You know, things that you say when you're not intending to retire, when you're intending to retain control of the IP. So, I think that they're going to have it for a while, but I do think that Greg is eventually going to take over at some point and essentially is in line to.
I do not believe in the mafia, but I do believe that Albert R. Broccoli instilled a sense of family into Babs, and she is going to hold on to this for her children and her children's children. Barbara Broccoli is a queen. There is no way she's getting rid of this fucking cow at all.
No, not at all. And people be acting like, oh, she's so dude, she's only like 61. She's got a long way. She's not about to throw this away.
She is part of a production company that is based on family.
Plus,
like, there is absolutely nothing about this business that is going to be wrestled away. And part of it is going to be incorporating new ideas and bringing new things. But you know what everybody who has to make a James Bond movie has to do? Read James Bond books, except for the actors.
Yeah, and I think also that if she ever got to a point where she's just too physically tired and wants to retire to other things, I think she would hire somebody else to partner up with Greg or find somebody else before she would ever actually sell it. Because they make tons of money on the Eon side. Because remember, Eon doesn't have to pay a dime for these movies. The whole deal is that MGM finances it, and they have total creative control at Eon. So it's not like they're hurting for cash to be in a rush to sell it either.
Well, and Kat, just before we make sure I don't turn into a pumpkin, how long has Barbara Broccoli been involved? I keep stumbling over the last name because it just... Anyway, I want to say Barkley.
Okay, so she started out in the publicity department of the...
Well, no. What was the first movie that she was executive producer on?
I believe maybe GoldenEye, if not earlier. Because, well, I'd have to double check because I know that Cubby Broccoli, even though he was still alive during GoldenEye, he wasn't really on the set for that one. That was kind of... Like, he was supervising behind the scenes.
Declining health.
Barbara and Michael helped. But the first movie they did post-Cubby was Tomorrow Never Dies, which they felt got a bit rushed because the company, MGM, had a merger with another comms giant, and the CEO of that comms giant wanted a Bond movie out within 2 years to celebrate the initial public offering of his company. And I have a feeling the fact that movie therefore got rushed and came out the same day, I believe, as Titanic.
Same day as Titanic, yep.
Yeah, just got swallowed by that.
Yep.
But so they've been the sole producers since Tomorrow Never Dies. She started out in the publicity department of The Spy Who Loved Me, and Michael G. Wilson, he started out with a cameo in Goldfinger actually, and has been involved. He actually was a screenwriter on the franchise for quite a while as well, the 70s and the 80s. So that's that.
So anyway, I just wanted to say that in terms of whoever succeeds these producers, it makes sense that one person would be of a family And if the lady producer who has been successful in her production chooses a successor,
Yeah.
like if it's, I'm trying to sort of categorize or at least compare and contrast Kathleen Kennedy and Barbara Broccoli.
Well, Barbara Broccoli has a lot more control over her IP than Kennedy.
Agreed. And that's why I think that some deference should be given to her successor.
Yeah.
Whoever she chooses, whoever Babs chooses, I'm fine.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. They got it handled.
Of course they do. Oh no, I'm just a guy on the internet. I'm not even giving advice. I'm just saying this is what I think. And also I'm sort of anticipating the backlash of we'll hire this person, and then you know what's going to happen when Barbara Barkley, damn it, retires, is that the entire internet is going to be like, oh no, Barbara Broccoli just fucking hired this woke whatever, or it was a man, so not truly. Like, it's going to be a thing. It's going to be a thing.
Already a thing with people bitching about this movie insanely, talking about how much they hate it because it's too woke. I'm like, what part of this is what? Like, I feel that people don't know what the word woke actually means.
I don't even.
Yeah, so
I'm just saying. I'm talking about the inherent reaction. Yeah, and I just really appreciate having these conversations with you where we both don't like all the same James Bond movies, right?
Yeah, right.
Like, there are some that you even question my intelligence.
I don't think I went that far.
For the sake of argument and being self-deprecating, why am I trying to pronounce things right now? So anyway, all I'm saying is that this is not the end of James Bond. The death of James Bond is not the death of James Bond. What's happening next week? What James Bond movie are we watching next week?
Are there more comments first?
No, we're done. Well, Tom says a couple things.
So let's get to that real quick.
Well, Tom says he had a pleasure and he had a blast.
Yes, you did. Thanks, Tom. You were really great on the show on Saturday there.
He was. And I didn't know she had kids.
I don't know if Barbara does. I know Michael.
I thought I was referring to Michael.
Oh, yeah, because you said Barbara and if her children, and I thought, well, I don't know if Barbara does. Okay, so is that it for comments?
That is it.
All right, so I can't believe it.
Oh, wait. No, there's one more, Tom. You call her Babs like you know her so well. Kathleen Kennedy must be sad now. Don't tell Kathy!
All right, so with that, I can't believe it. The film has finally come. We've finally seen it. The countdown is over. At least for those of us in several countries, a few countries left to come out, and I understand. But yeah, so now it's more like the countdown to the Blu-ray and the 4K, whenever those dates are announced. But next week, we will be getting back on track with jumping back in time and beginning with Connery's last official Bond film, Diamonds Are Forever. Which Scotty's got there to show us. Yes, that'll be a fun review. I haven't seen that movie in a while, so it's going to be fun to pop that one in and refresh my memory.
Blu-ray?
Yes.
Excellent.
I got the Bond 50 set up there.
No, I know. I can see the things. I'm just verbally asking about your credentials. That's all. Well, thank you again, Kat. I can't believe that you gave such an incredible recap. That was amazing. That was a blow-by-blow scene, and you talked about On Her Majesty's Secret Service in the same way. You talked about Thunderball in the same way. You were just like, bing, bang, boom. This is what happened. Shut up, Scott. It was awesome. I love talking to you about this. This is great because it worked. I love it. Anyway, I hope anyone else does as well. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everyone in the chat. Thank you, Captain Cockney Spock. Thank you, Naladoc. Thank you, everyone who was here. If I missed you, I apologize. I am half in the bag. But until next time, Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns will return. Kat?
We will return next Wednesday with Diamonds Are Forever.
Okay. Well,
thank you.
See you guys.
See you guys later. Great.